all four. "Master Gill, come and tell what you saw." A head appeared in the doorway, bald top shining in the darkness. Behind, in the other room, a hulking shadow moved. Lamgwyn Dorn. When Basil Gill realized she was still in bed, that faint shining from his scalp jerked as he directed his eyes elsewhere, though he probably had difficulty making out more than the bed itself. Master Gill was even wider than Lamgwyn, but not nearly as tall. "Forgive me, my queen. I didn't mean to—" He cleared his throat violently, and his boots scraped on the floor, shifting. Had he had a cap, he would have been turning it in his hands, or wadding it nervously. "I was in the long corridor on my way to the Jakes," was what he could not bring himself to say to her. "Anyway, I glanced out one of the windows, and I saw a big bird, I think, land on top of the South Barracks." "A bird?" Linny's thin voice drove Master Gill to leap into the room, clearing the doorway. Or maybe it was a sharp poke in his stout ribs. Linny usually took every advantage her gray hair offered. She stalked by him, still belting her nightrobe. "Fools! Ox-brained lummoxes! You woke my She stopped with a fierce cough. Linny never forgot that she had been Morgase's nurse, and her mother's as well, but she never slipped in front of others. She would be cross that she had now, and it showed in her voice. "You woke your queen for a bird?" Patting her hairnet, she automatically tucked in a few strands that had escaped in her sleep. "Have you been drinking, Basil Gill?" Morgase wondered that herself. "I didn't know it was a bird," Master Gill protested. "It didn't look like any bird, but what else flies except bats? It was big. Men climbed off its back, and there was another still on its neck when it took off again. While I was slapping my face to wake up, another of the things landed, and more men climbed down. And then another came, and I decided it was time to tell Lord Talonvor." Linny did not sniff, but Morgase could almost feel her stare, and it was not directed at her. The man who had abandoned his inn to follow her certainly felt it. "The light's own truth, my queen," he insisted. "Light," Talonvor announced like an echo. Something just landed atop the North Barracks." Morgase had never heard him sound shaken before. All she wanted was to make them all go away and leave her alone in her misery, but there seemed no hope. Talonvor was worse than Brianna in many ways, much worse. "My robe," she said, and for once Brianna was quick to hand her one. Master Gill hastily turned his face to the wall while she climbed from the bed and put on the silk robe. She strode to the window, tying the sash. The long North Barracks loomed across the wide courtyard, 4 hulking floors of flat-roofed dark stone. Not a light showed, there or anywhere in the fortress. All was stillness and silence. "I see nothing, Talonvor." He drew her back. "Just watch," he said. Another time she would have regretted his hand leaving her shoulder, and been irritated at her own regret as well as his tone. Now, after Valda, she felt relief, and irritation at the relief as well as his tone. He was too disrespectful by miles, far too stubborn, too young, not much older than Galad. Shadows moved as the moon did, but nothing else stirred. Off in the city of Amador, a dog bayed, answered by more. Then, as she opened her mouth to dismiss Talonvor and all of them, darkness atop the massive barracks humped up and hurled itself off the roof. Something, Talonvor had called it, and she had no better name. An impression of a long body that seemed thicker than a man was tall, great ribbed wings like a bat's sweeping down as the creature fell toward the courtyard. A figure, a man, sitting just behind a sinuous neck. And then the wings caught air, and the something soared up, blocking the moonlight as it swept over her head, trailing a long, thin tail. Morgase closed her mouth slowly. The only thought that came to her was shadow spawn. Trollocs and Myrdral were not the only shadow-twisted creatures in the Blight. She had never been taught of anything like this, but her tutors in the tower said that things lived there no one had ever seen clearly and lived to describe. How could it be so far south, though? Abruptly, a flash of light flared with a great boom in the direction of the main gates, and then again at two more places along the great outer wall. Those were gates, too, she believed. What in the pit of doom was that? Talonvor muttered in a moment of silence before alarm gongs began resounding in the darkness. Shouts rose, and screams, and hoarse cries like some sort of horn. Fire leaped with a crash of thunder, then again elsewhere. The one power, Morghese breathed. She might not be able to channel, or as well as not, but she could tell that. Notions of shadow spawn fled. It it must be Aes Sedai. She heard someone's breath catch behind her, Linny or Brianna. Basil Gill excitedly murmured, Aes Sedai, and Lamgwin murmured back too low for her to understand. Off in the darkness, metal clashed on metal, fire bellowed, and lightning streaked from the cloudless sky. Faintly through the din came alarm bells from the city at last, but strangely few. Aes Sedai? Talonvor sounded doubtful. Why now? To rescue you, Morghese? I thought they couldn't use the power against men, only shadow spawn. Besides, if that winged creature wasn't shadow spawn, I will never see one. You don't know what you are talking about, she said, confronting him heatedly. You... A crossbow bolt clashed against the window frame in a spray of stone chips. Air stirred against her face as it ricocheted between them and planted itself in one of the bedposts with a solid chunk. A few inches to the right, and all her troubles would have been ended. She did not move, but Talonvor pulled her away from the window with an oath. Even by moonlight she could see his frown as he studied her. For a moment she thought he might touch her face. If he did, she did not know whether she would weep or scream or order him to leave her forever, or... Instead, he said, more likely it's some of those men, those shaman or whatever they call themselves. He insisted on accepting the strange, impossible tales that had seeped even into the fortress. I think I can get you out right now. Everything will be confusion. Come with me. She did not correct him. Few people knew anything about the One Power, much less the differences between Saidar and Saidin. His idea had its attractions. They might be able to escape in the bedlam of a battle. Take her out into that? Lenny screeched. Flaring lights drowned the moon at the window. Crashes and thunders drowned the din of men and swords. I thought you had more wits, Martin Talonvor. Only fools kiss hornets or bite fire. You heard her say it's Aes Sedai. Do you think she doesn't know? Do you? My lord, if it is Aes Sedai... Master Gill trailed off. Talonvor's hands fell away from her, and he grumbled under his breath, wishing he had a sword. Pt.9 had allowed him to keep his blade. Eamon Valda was not so trusting. For an instant, disappointment swelled in her breast. If only he had insisted, had dragged her. What was the matter with her? Had he tried to drag her anywhere for any reason, she would have had his hide. She needed to take hold of herself. Valda had dented her confidence. No, he had casually ripped it to shreds, but she must cling to those shreds and knit them up again, somehow, if the tatters were worth knitting up again. At least I can find out what is happening, Talonvor growled, striding for the door. If it isn't your Aes Sedai, no, you will remain here, please. She was very glad of the pale darkness, hiding her furiously flushing face. She would have bitten her tongue off before saying that last word, but it had slipped out before she knew. She went on in firmer tones. You will remain here, guarding your queen as you should. In the dim light she could see his face, and his bow seemed quite proper, but she would have wagered her last copper both were angry. I will be in your anteroom. Well, there was no doubt about his voice. For once, though, she cared neither how angry he was nor how little he hid it. Very possibly she might kill the infuriating man with her own hands. But he was not going to die tonight, cut down by soldiers, with no way to tell which side he was on. There was no hope of sleep now, even had she been able. Without lighting any lamps, she washed her face and teeth. Brianna and Leanie helped her dress, in blue silk slashed with green, with spills of snowy lace at her wrists and beneath her chin. It would do very well for receiving Aes Sedai. Saidar raged in the night. They had to be Aes Sedai. Who else could it be? When she joined the men in the anteroom, they were sitting in darkness except for the moonlight through the windows and the occasional flash of power-wrought fire. Even a candle might attract unwanted attention. Lamgwyn and Master Gill sprang from their chairs respectfully. Talonvor stood more slowly, and she needed no light to know he regarded her with a sullen frown. Furious that she had to ignore him, she was his queen. Furious and barely able to keep it from her voice, she ordered Lamgwyn to bring more of the tall wooden chairs further from the windows. In silence they sat and waited, at least silence on their part. Outside, thunderous crashes and roars still echoed. Horns cried and men shouted, and through it she felt Saidar surge and fall and surge again. Slowly, after at least an hour, the battle dwindled and died. Voices still shouted incomprehensible orders, wounded screamed, and sometimes those strange hoarse horns gave voice, but no more did steel ring on steel. Saidar faded. She was sure women still held it inside the fortress, but she did not think any channeled now. All seemed close to peaceful after the clamor and commotion. Talonvor stirred, but she waved him back before he could rise. For a moment she thought he would not obey. Night weakened, and sunlight crept in through the windows, shining on Talonvor's glower. She held her hands still in her lap. Patience was but one of the virtues that young man needed to learn. Patience stood second only to courage as a noble virtue. The sun rose higher. Linny and Brianna began whispering together in increasingly worried tones, shooting glances in her direction. Talonvor scowled, dark eyes smoldering, sitting rigid in that dark blue coat that fit him so well. Master Gill fidgeted, running first one hand, then the other across his gray-fringed head, mopping his pink cheeks with a handkerchief. Lamgwyn slouched in his chair, the one-time street tough's heavy-lidded eyes making him seem half asleep. But whenever he glanced at Brianna, a smile flickered on his face. Soon she was going to have sharp words to. Despite herself, she jumped at an abrupt pounding on the door to the hallway. Before she could tell Brianna to see who was there, the door swung open, banging against the wall. More gaze stared at who entered. A tall, dark, hook-nosed man stared back at her coldly, the long hilt of a sword rising above his shoulder. Strange armor covered his chest, overlapping plates lacquered glistening gold and black, and he held a helmet on his hip that looked like an insect's head, black and gold and green, with three long, thin green plumes. Two more armored like him came at his heels, wearing their helmets, though without plumes. Their armor seemed painted rather than lacquered, and they carried crossbows ready. Still more stood in the hall outside, with gold and black tasseled spears. Talonvor and Lamgwyn and even stout Master Gill scrambled to their feet, placing themselves between her and her peculiar visitors. She had to push a way through. The hook-nosed man's eyes went straight to her before she could demand an explanation. "You are Morghese, Queen of Andor." His voice was harsh, and he drawled his words so badly she barely understood. He stepped on her reply. "You will come with me, alone," he added, as Talonvor and Lamgwyn and Master Gill all moved forward. The crossbowmen presented their weapons. The heavy quarrels looked made to punch holes in armor. A man would hardly slow one down. "I have no objection to my people remaining here until I return," she said a good deal more calmly than she felt. Who were these people? She was familiar with the accents of every nation, familiar with their armor. I am sure you will see to my safety very well, Captain. He did not supply a name, only motioned curtly for her to follow. To her vast relief, Talonvor made no fuss, despite his hot gaze. To her vast irritation, Master Gill and Lamgwin looked to him before stepping back. In the hallway, the soldiers formed around her, the hook-nosed officer and the two crossbow men in the lead. A guard of honor, she tried to tell herself. This soon after a battle, wandering around unprotected was worse than foolish. There might be holdouts who would seize a hostage or kill any who saw them. She wished she believed that. She tried questioning the officer, but he never spoke a word, never slackened his stride or turned his head, and she stopped trying. None of the soldiers so much as glanced at her. They were hard-eyed men of the kind she knew from her own Queen's guards, men who had seen fighting before, more than once. But who were they? Their boots struck the floor stones as one in an ominous drumbeat emphasized by the stark fortress corridors. There was little color, nothing for beauty except scattered tapestries showing white cloaks in bloody battle. She realized they were taking her toward the Lord Captain Commander's quarters, and a queasiness settled in the pit of her stomach. She had grown almost pleasantly accustomed to the way while Pt.9 lived. She had come to dread it in the few days since he died. But as they rounded a corner, she started at the sight of some 24 archers marching behind their own officer, men in baggy trousers and boiled leather breastplates, painted in horizontal stripes of blue and black. Each man wore a conical steel cap, with a veil of gray steel mail covering his face to the eyes. Here and there the ends of mustaches dangled below the veils. The archer's officer bowed to the one leading her guard, who merely raised his hand in reply. Taraboners. She had not seen a Taraboner soldier in a good many years, but those men were Taraboners in spite of those stripes, or she would eat her slippers. Yet that made no sense. Tarabon was chaos come to life, a 100-sided civil war between pretenders to the throne and dragon spawn. Tarabon could never have launched his attack on Amador itself, unless, incredibly, one claimant had won out over the rest, and over the Dragonsworn, and it was impossible. And it did not explain these strangely armored soldiers, or that winged beast, or she thought she had seen strangeness. She thought she had known queasiness. Then she and her guard turned another corner and encountered two women. One was slender, short as any Kyrianan and darker than any Tyran, in a blue dress that stopped well short of her ankles. Silver lightning forked across red panels on her breast and the sides of her wide divided skirts. The other woman, in drab dark gray, stood taller than most men, with golden hair to her shoulders that had been brushed till it glistened, and frightened green eyes. A silver leash connected a silver bracelet on the shorter woman's wrist to a necklace worn by the taller. They stood aside for Morghese's guard, and when the hook-nosed officer murmured, "Der Soldan," Morghese thought that was it. His slurred accent made understanding difficult. When he murmured in tones nearly but not quite to an equal, the dark woman bowed her head slightly, twitched at the leash, and the golden-haired woman sank to the floor, folding herself with her head on her knees and her palms flat on the floor stones. As Morghese and her guards passed by, the dark woman bent to pat the other fondly on the head, as she might a dog. And worse, the kneeling woman looked up with pleasure and gratitude. Morghese made the necessary effort to keep walking, to keep her knees from folding, to keep her stomach from emptying itself. The sheer servility was bad enough, but she was certain the woman being patted on the head could channel. Impossible. She walked in a daze, wondering whether this could be a dream, a nightmare, praying that it was. She had a vague awareness of stopping for more soldiers, these in red and black armor. Then Pt.9's audience chamber, Valda's now, or rather whoever had taken the fortress, was changed. The great golden sunburst remained, set in the floor. But all Niall's captured banners, which Valda had kept as if they were his, were gone, and so were the furnishings, except for the plainly carved high-backed chair Niall and then Valda had used, flanked now by two tall, luridly painted screens. One showed a white-crested black bird of prey with a cruel beak, its white-tipped wings spread wide. The other a black-spotted yellow cat, with one paw on a dead deer-like creature half its size, with long straight horns and white stripes. There were a number of people in the room, but that was all she had time to notice before a sharp-faced woman in blue robes stepped forward, one side of her head shaved, and the remaining hair in a long brown braid that hung in front of her right shoulder. Her blue eyes, full of contempt, could have done for the eagles or the cats. "You are in the presence of the High Lady Suroth, who leads those who come before and succors the return," she intoned, in that same slurring accent. Without warning, the hook-nosed officer seized the back of Morgaze's neck and bore her down prostrate beside him. Stunned, not least because the breath was knocked out of her, she saw him kiss the floor. "Release her, Elbar," another woman drawled angrily. "The Queen of Andor is not to be treated so." The man, Elbar, rose as far as his knees, head bent. "I abase myself, High Lady. I beg forgiveness." His voice was as cold and flat as that accent allowed. "I have small forgiveness for this, Elbar." Morgaze looked up. Suroth took her aback. The sides of her head were shaved, leaving a glossy black crest across the top of her head, and a mane that flowed down her back. "Perhaps when you are punished. Report yourself now. Leave me. Go." A sweeping gesture flashed fingernails at least an inch long, the first two on each hand a glistening blue. Elbar bowed on his knees, then rose smoothly, backing away through the door. For the first time, Morgaze realized none of the other soldiers had followed them in. She realized something else as well. He gave her one final glance before he vanished, and instead of flickering resentment for the one who had caused his punishment, he considered. There would be no punishment. The entire exchange had been arranged beforehand. Suroth swept toward Morgaze, carefully holding her pale blue robe to keep her skirts exposed, snow white with hundreds of tiny pleats. Embroidered vines and lush red and yellow flowers spread across the robe. For all her sweeping, Morgaze noticed the woman did not reach her until she had regained her feet on her own. "You are unharmed?" Suroth asked. "If you are harmed, I will double his punishment." Morgaze brushed at her dress so she would not have to look at the false smile that never touched the woman's eyes. She took the opportunity to look around the room. 4 men and 4 women knelt against one wall, all young and more than good-looking, all wearing... She jerked her eyes away. Those long white robes were very nearly transparent. At the far sides of the screens, 2 more pairs of women knelt, one of each in the gray dress, one in the blue embroidered by lightning, bound by the silvery leash from wrist to neck. Morgaze was not close enough to say for sure, but she had the sick-making certainty that the gray-clad women could channel. "I'm quite all right, thank..." A huge reddish-brown shape lay sprawled on the floor, a heap of tanned cowskins, perhaps. Then it heaved. "What is that?" She managed not to gape, but the question popped from her tongue before she could stop it. "You admire my Lopar?" Suroth swept away a good deal quicker than she had come. The enormous shape raised a great round head for her to stroke it under the chin with a knuckle. The creature put Morgaze in mind of a bear, though it was easily half again as big as the largest bear she had ever heard tell of, and hairless to boot, with no muzzle to speak of, and heavy ridges surrounding its eyes. "Almandaragal was given to me as a pup for my first true name day. He foiled the first attempt to kill me that same year, when he was only a quarter grown." There was real affection in the woman's voice. The Lopar's lips peeled back to reveal thick, pointed teeth as she stroked. Its forepaws flexed, claws sheathing and unsheathing from 6 long toes on each. and it began to purr, a bass rumble fit for 100 cats. Remarkable, Morghese said faintly. True name day? How many attempts had there been to kill this woman that she could speak of the first so casually? The Lopar whined briefly when Suroth left it, but quickly settled with its head on its paws. Disconcertingly, its eyes did not follow her, but settled mainly on Morghese, now and then flicking toward the door or the narrow arrow-slit windows. Of course, however loyal a Lopar, it cannot match Damani. No affection touched Suroth's voice now. Pura and Jinjin could slay 100 assassins before Alman Daragal blinked his eye. At the mention of each name, one of the blue-clad women twitched her silvery leash, and the woman at the other end doubled herself as the one in the corridor had. We have many more Damani since returning than before. This is a rich hunting ground for Marath Damani. Pura, she added casually, was once a woman of the White Tower. Morghese's knees wobbled. Aes Sedai? She studied the bent back of the woman called Pura, refusing to believe. No Aes Sedai could be made to cringe like that. But any woman who could channel, not just an Aes Sedai, should be able to take that leash and strangle her tormentor. Anyone at all should be able to. No, this Pura could not be. Morghese wondered if she dared ask for a chair. That is very interesting. At least her voice was steady. But I do not think you asked me here to speak of Aes Sedai. Of course, she had not been asked. Suroth stared at her, not a muscle moving except that the long-nailed fingers of her left hand twitched. Thera, the sharp-faced woman with half her head shaved, barked suddenly. Calf for the High Lady and her guest. One of the women in diaphanous robes, the eldest but still young, leaped gracefully to her feet. Her rosebud mouth had a petulant look to it, but she darted behind the tall screen painted with the eagle, and in moments reappeared bearing a silver tray with 2 small white cups. Kneeling sinuously before Suroth, she bowed her dark head as she raised the tray, so her offering stood higher than she. Morghese shook her head. Any servant in Andor asked to do that, or wear that robe, would have stormed off in a dudgeon. Who are you? Where do you come from? Suroth raised one of the cups on her fingertips, inhaling the steam rising from it. Her nod was entirely too much permission for Morghese's liking, but she took a cup anyway. One sip and she stared into her drink in amazement. Blacker than any tea, the liquid was also more bitter. No amount of honey would make it drinkable. Suroth put her own cup to her lips and sighed with enjoyment. There are many things we must speak of, Morghese, yet I will be brief at this first talk. We Shan returned to reclaim what was stolen from the heirs of the High King, Artur Pendrag Tunreal. Pleasure over the calf became a different pleasure in her voice, both expectation and certainty, and she watched Morghese's face closely. Morghese could not take her eyes away. What was ours will be ours again. In truth, it always has been. A thief gains no ownership. I have begun the recovery in Tarabon. Many nobles of that land have already sworn to obey, await, and serve. It will not be long before all have. Their king, I cannot recall his name, died opposing me. Had he lived in rebellion against the Crystal Throne, and not even of the blood, he would have been impaled. His family could not be found to be made property, but there is a new king and a new panarch who have sworn their fealty to the Empress, may she live forever, and the Crystal Throne. The bandits will be eradicated. No longer will there be strife or hunger in Tarabon, but the people will shelter beneath the wings of the Empress. Now I begin in this Amadisia. Soon all will kneel to the Empress, may she live forever, the direct descendant of the great Artur. If the serving woman had not gone with the tray, Morghese would have put her cup back. No tremor disturbed the dark surface of the calf, but much of what the woman spouted was meaningless to her. Empress? Shanshan? There had been wild rumors a year or more ago about Arthur Hawkwing's armies come back from across the Aras Ocean, but only the most credulous could have believed, and she doubted that the worst gossip monger in the market still told the tale. Could it have been truth? In any case, what she did understand was more than enough. All honor the name of Arthur Hawkwing Suroth. The sharp-faced woman opened her mouth angrily, subsiding at the move of a blue-nailed finger by the High Lady. But his time is long past. Every nation here has an ancient lineage. No land will surrender to you or your empress. If you have taken some part of Tarabon, Suroth's indrawn breath hissed, and her eyes glittered. Remember that it is a troubled land, divided against itself. Amadisia will not fall easily, and many nations will ride to her aid when they learn of you. Could it be true? However many you are, you will find no easy game for your spit. We have faced great threats before and overcome them. I advise you to make peace before you are crushed. Morghese remembered Saidar raging in the night, and avoided looking at the Damani, had she called them? By strong effort, she managed not to wet her lips. Suroth smiled that masked smile again, eyes shining like polished stones. All must make choices. Some will choose to obey, await, and serve, and will rule their lands in the name of the Empress. May she live forever. She took a hand from her cup to gesture, a slight movement of long fingernails, and the sharp-faced woman barked, "Thera! Poses of the swan!" For some reason, Suroth's mouth tightened. "Not the swan, Alwyn, you blind fool," she hissed, half under her breath, though her accent made understanding difficult. The frozen smile returned in an instant. The serving woman rose from her place at the wall again, running out to the middle of the floor in an odd way, on tiptoe, with her arms swept back. Slowly, atop the flaring golden sun, symbol of the children of the light, she began a sort of stylized dance. Her arms unfolded to the sides like wings, then folded back. Twisting, she slid her left foot out, lowering herself over the bending knee, both arms outstretched as if appealing, until arms and body and right leg made a straight slanted line. Her sheer white robe made the whole thing scandalous. Morghese felt her cheeks growing hot as the dance, if it could be called that, continued. "Thera is new and not well trained yet," Suroth murmured. "The poses are most often done with 10 or 20 Dakovale together, men and women chosen for the clean beauty of their lines, but sometimes it is pleasant to view only one. It is very pleasant to own beautiful things, is it not?" Morghese frowned. How could anyone own a person? Suroth had spoken earlier about making someone property. She knew the old tongue, and the word Dakovale was not familiar to her, but thinking it out, she came up with person who is owned. It was disgusting, horrendous. "Incredible," she said dryly. "Perhaps I should leave you to enjoy the dance." "In one moment," Suroth said, smiling at the posturing Thera. Morghese avoided looking. "All have choices to make, as I said. The old king of Tarabon chose to rebel and died. The old panarch was captured, yet refused the oath. Each of us has a place where we belong, unless raised by the Empress. But those who reject their proper place can also be cast down, even to the depths. Thera has a certain grace. Strangely, Alwyn shows great promise in teaching, so I expect that before many years, Thera will learn the skill and the poses to go with her grace." That smile swiveled toward Morghese, that glittering gaze. A very significant gaze, but why? Something to do with the dancer? Her name, mentioned so often, as if to highlight it. But what? Morghese's head whipped around, and she stared at the woman, up on her toes and slowly pivoting in one spot, with her hands flat together and arms stretched up as high as they would go. "I don't believe it," she gasped. "I won't." "Thera," Suroth said. "What was your name before you became my property? What title did you hold?" Thera froze in her upstretched posture, quivering, shooting a look half panic, half terror at sharp-faced Alwyn, a look of pure terror at Suroth. Thera was called Amathera, if it pleases the High Lady, she said breathily. Thera was the Panarch of Tarabon, if it pleases the High Lady. The cup dropped from Morgaze's hand, smashing to bits on the floor, spraying the black calf. It had to be a lie. She had never met Amathera, but she had heard a description once. No. Many women of the right age could have large, dark eyes and a petulant mouth. Pura had never been Aes Sedai, and this woman... Pose! Alwyn snapped, and Thera flowed on without so much as one more glance at Suroth or anyone. Whoever she was,
Hey,
clearly
Zoe, how
the
you
foremost
doing?
thought in her head now
It's
was
good
an
to see
urgent
ya.
desire not to make a mistake. Morgaze concentrated
Just
on not
rolling one up
vomiting.
real quick.
Suroth stepped very close, face cold as midwinter. All confront choices, she said quietly. Her voice could have marked steel. Some of my prisoners say that you spent time in the White Tower. By law, no Marath Damani may escape the leash, but I pledge to you that you, who named me to my eyes and called lie on my word, you will not face that fate. The emphasis made quite clear that her pledge covered no other possible fate. The smile that never reached her eyes returned. I hope that you
Hell
will
yeah.
choose to swear the oath, Morgaze, and rule Andor in the name of the Empress. May she live forever. For the first time, Morgaze was absolutely certain the
Use
woman
this for
lied.
the.
I will
Use my
speak to you
cleaning
again
tray
tomorrow,
for a little
or
ashtray right
perhaps the
now.
next day, if I have time. Turning
Let me
away,
show you.
Suroth glided past
Ozzy
the
real
lone
quick.
dancer to the high-backed chair. As she sat, spreading her robe gracefully, Alwyn barked again. She did not seem to have any other voice. All poses of the swan. The young men and women kneeling against the wall moved forward to join Thera, joining her movements exactly in a line before Suroth's chair. Only the Lopar's gaze still acknowledged Morgaze's existence. She did not believe she had ever been dismissed so thoroughly in her life. Gathering her dignity with her skirts, she did not go far alone, of course. Those red and black armored soldiers stood in the anteroom like statues with red and black tasseled spears, faces impassive in their lacquered helmets, hard eyes seeming to stare from behind the mandibles of monstrous insects.
Hell
One,
yeah.
not much taller than she, fell in at her shoulder
Skinny.
without a word and escorted her
Seated.
back to her rooms, where two Taraboners with swords flanked her
Let's light
door,
this up.
these in steel breastplates, but still painted in horizontal stripes.
Got
They
some
bowed
shake
low,
from the dish
hands on
bowl,
their
and
knees, and she thought it was for
it
her,
wasn't the
until
greatest.
her escort spoke
But
for the first time.
I mixed it with some roach
Honor Matt,
weed, so
he said in a
I guess
harsh,
we're about to
dry
find
voice,
out if it's a
and the
little bit
Taraboners
better.
straightened,
Because
never glancing at her until he
it was
said,
horrible.
Watch her well. She has not given the oath. Dark eyes flickered toward her above steel veils, but their short bows of assent were for the Shanchan. She tried not to hurry inside, but once the door was closed behind her, she leaned against it, attempting to settle her whirling thoughts. Shanchan and Damani, empresses and oaths and
You can
people
tell it's
owned.
breaking up roaches.
Linny and Brianna stood in the middle of the room, looking at her. What did you learn? Linny asked patiently, in much the tone in which she had questioned the child Morgaze about a
With the
book
roach
read.
weed, it's a lot better.
Nightmares and madness, Morgaze sighed. Suddenly she stood up straight, looking around the room anxiously. Where are the men? Brianna answered the unasked question in a dryly mocking tone. Talonvor went to see what he could find out. Her fists planted themselves on her hips, and her face became deadly serious.
Got
Lamgwen went
because
with him, and Master Gil. What did you
it was a
find
cheap
out?
ounce at
Who
the
are these
dispensary for
Shanchan?
pretty
She
much
said
a
the name
shake.
awkwardly, frowning around it. We heard that much for ourselves. She affected not to notice Linny's biting
Just
stare.
gag. We got home.
What are we to do now,
I
Morgaze?
rolled one up, and
Morgaze
yeah,
brushed between the women,
it
crossing to the
was a
nearest window. Not as
little
narrow as those
disappointing.
in the
So
audience chamber,
I mixed
it
some of
looked
the
down
shake
20
with
feet or more to the stone paving of the
some roach
courtyard.
weed.
A dispirited column of bare-headed, disheveled men, some with blood-stained bandages, shambled
Let's see
across
if I
the
can show you
courtyard
inside.
under the watchful gaze of Taraboners carrying spears. Several Shonchan stood atop a nearby tower, peering into the distance between the crenellations. One wore a helmet decorated with 3 slender plumes. A woman appeared in a window across the court, the lightning-embroidered red panel plain on her breast,
Just didn't taste
frowning
very
down
good.
at the white-cloaked prisoners. Those
At least by
stumbling men
itself,
looked
but with the
stunned,
roaches with it,
unable to believe what had happened.
it's a lot better.
What were they to do? A decision Morgaze dreaded. It seemed that she had not made so much as a decision on fruit for breakfast in months, without it leading to disaster. A choice, Suroth had said. Aid these Shonchan in taking Andor, or what any service she could do for Andor. The tail end of the column appeared, followed by more Taraboners, who were joined by their countrymen they passed. A 20-foot fall, and Suroth lost her lever. Maybe it was the coward's way out, but she'd already proved herself that. Still, the Queen of Andor should not die so. Under her breath, she spoke the irrevocable words that had been used only twice before in the 1,000-year history of Andor. Under the light, I relinquish the high seat of House Trakand to Elaine Trakand. Under the light, I renounce the rose crown and abdicate the lion throne to Elaine, high seat of House Trakand. Under the light, I submit myself to the will of Elaine of Andor, her obedient subject. None of that made Elaine queen, true, but it cleared the way. What are you smiling at? Linny asked. Morgaze turned slowly. I was thinking of Elaine. She did not think her old nurse had been close enough to hear what no one really needed to. Linny's eyes widened, though, and her breath caught. You come away from there now, she snapped, and suiting actions to words, seized her arm and physically pulled her from the window. Linny, you forget yourself. You stopped being my nurse a long... Morgaze drew a deep breath and softened her tone. Meeting those frightened eyes was not easy. Nothing frightened Linny. What I do is for the best, believe me, she told her gently. There's no other way. No other way? Brianna broke in angrily, gripping her skirts till her hands shook. Clearly, she would rather have had them wrapped around Morgaze's throat. What fool nonsense are you spouting now? What if these Shonchan think we killed you? Morgaze compressed her lips. Had she become so transparent? Shut up, woman! Linny never got angry either, or raised her voice, but she did both now, her withered cheeks red. She raised a bony hand. You hold your mouth, or I'll slap you sillier than you are. Slap her if you want to slap someone, Brianna shouted back so fiercely that spittle flew. Queen Morgaze? She will send you and me and my Lambquin to the gallows, and her precious Talonvor too, because she lacks the belly of a mouse. The door opened to admit Talonvor and put an abrupt end to it. No one was about to shout in front of him. Linny pretended to examine Morgaze's sleeve as though it might need mending, as Master Gill and Lambquin followed Talonvor in. Brianna put on a bright smile and smoothed her skirts. The men noticed nothing, of course. Morgaze noticed a great deal. For one thing, Talonvor had a sword belted on, and so did Master Gill and even Lambquin, though his was a short sword. She'd always had the feeling he was more comfortable with his fists than any other weapons. Before she could ask how, the skinny little man who brought up the rear closed the door carefully behind him. Majesty, Sebin Balwer said, forgive the intrusion. Even his bow and his smile seemed dry and precise, but as his eyes flicked from her to the other women, Morgaze decided that whether the other men noticed the atmosphere in the room or not, Pedro Niles' one-time secretary did. I am surprised to see you, Master Balwer, she said. I heard there was some unpleasantness with Eamon Valda. What she had heard was that Valda had said if he laid eyes on Balwer, he would kick him over one of the fortress walls. Balwer's smile tightened. He knew what Valda had said. He has a plan to take us all out of here, Talonvor broke in. Today. Now. He gave her a look not that of subject to queen. We are accepting his offer. How? She said slowly, forcing her legs to remain straight. What help could this prissy little stick of a man offer? Escape. She wanted very much to sit down, but she was not going to. Not with Talonvor looking at her in that fashion. Of course, she was not his queen now, but he did not know that. Another question occurred. Why? Master Balwar, I'll not shun any true offer of help, but why would you risk yourself? These Shan-Chan will make you regret it should they find out. I laid my plans before they came, he said carefully. It seemed imprudent to leave the Queen of Andor in Balwar's hands. Consider it my way of repaying you. I know I am not much to look at, Majesty. He hid a self-deprecating cough behind his hand. But the plan will work. These Shan-Chan actually make it easier. I would not have been ready for days yet without them. For a newly conquered city, they allow remarkable freedom to anyone willing to say their oath. Not an hour after sunrise, I obtained a pass allowing myself and up to 10 more who have taken the oath to depart Amador. They believe I intend to buy wine and wagons to carry it in the east. It must be a trap. The words tasted bitter. Better the window than falling into some snare. They won't allow you to carry word of them ahead of their army. Balwar's head tilted to one side, and he began dry washing his hands, then stopped abruptly. In truth, Majesty, I considered it. The officer who gave me the pass said it did not matter. His exact words, tell who you will what you have seen. Let them know you cannot stand against us. Your lands will know soon enough anyway. I have seen several merchants take the oath this morning and depart with their wagons. Talonvor moved close to her, too close. She could almost feel his breath. She could feel his eyes. We are accepting his offer, he said, for her ears alone. If I must bind and gag you, I think he can find a way even so. He seemed a very resourceful little fellow. She met him stare for stare. The window, or a chance. If Talonvor had only held his tongue, it would have been much easier to say, I accept with gratitude, Master Balwar, but she said it. She stepped away as if to see Balwar without having to crane past Talonvor. It was always disturbing being so near to him. He was too young. What is to do first? I doubt those guards at the door will accept your pass for us. Balwar bowed his head as if acknowledging her foresight. I fear they must meet with accidents, Majesty. Talonvor eased his dagger in its scabbard, and Lamgwin flexed his hands, like the Lopar flexing its claws. She did not believe it could be so easy, even after they had packed up what they could carry and the 2 Taraboners had been stuffed beneath her bed. At the main gates, holding her linen dust cloak close awkwardly because of the bundle on her back, she bowed, hands on her knees the way Balwar had shown her, while he told the guards that they had all sworn to obey, await, and serve. She thought of how to make sure she was not taken alive. It was not until they were actually riding out of Amador, past the last guards, on the horses Balwar had had waiting, that she began to believe. Of course, Balwar probably expected some fine reward for rescuing the Queen of Andor. She had not told anyone that that was done with beyond going back. She knew she had spoken the words, and no one else needed to know. Regretting them was useless. Now she would see what sort of life she could find without a throne. A life far from a man who was much too young and much too disturbing. Why is your smile so sad? Linny asked, reining her slab-sided brown mare closer. The animal looked moth-eaten. Morghase's bay was no better. None of the horses were. The Shan-Chan might have been willing to let Balwar go with his pass, but not with decent mounts. There is a long road ahead yet, Morghase told her, and thumped her mare into some semblance of a trot after Talonvor.
Chapter 27. To be alone. Slipping the haft of his axe through the loop on his belt opposite his quiver, Perrin took his unstrung longbow from the corner, slung his saddlebags over his shoulder, and left the rooms he had shared with Fail without a backward look. They had been happy there, most of the time. He did not think he would ever be back. Sometimes he wondered whether being happy somewhere with Fail meant he would never return home. He hoped not. The servants he saw in the palace corridors wore unrelieved black livery. Perhaps Rand had ordered it, and perhaps the servants themselves had simply adopted it. They had been uneasy without livery, as though they did not know where they belonged, and black seemed safe as Rand's color because of the Ashaman. Those who saw Perrin scampered away as fast as they could, not waiting for any bows or curtsies.
I'm gonna smoke the
Fear
whole thing.
scent drifted behind them.
I guess that says that it didn't taste
For
too
once, his
bad.
yellow eyes had nothing to do with anyone being afraid. It might not be safe to loiter near a man at whom the Dragon Reborn had unleashed his rage so publicly this very morning. Perrin eased the shoulder under his saddlebags. A long while had passed since anyone had been able to pick him up and throw him. Of course, no one had ever used the power to try before. One moment in particular stuck with him. He pushed himself up, holding his shoulder, sliding his back up the square column that had stopped his flight. He thought a few ribs might have cracked. Around the Great Hall of the Sun, a scattering of nobles who had come to appeal one thing or another to Rand, tried to look anywhere else, tried to pretend they were anywhere else. Only Dobrain watched, shaking his gray head as Rand stalked across the throne room. "I will deal with the Aes Sedai as I choose," Rand shouted. "Do you hear me, Perrin? As I choose." "You've just handed them over to the Wise Ones," he growled back, shoving away from the column. "You don't know whether they're sleeping on silk or had their throats cut. You are not the creator." With a snarl of rage, Rand threw his head back. "I am the Dragon Reborn," he cried. "I don't care how they're treated. They deserve a dungeon." Perrin's hackles stirred as Rand's eyes lowered from the vaulted ceiling. Blue ice would have been warm and soft beside them, the more so because they stared from a face twisted with pain. "Get out of my sight, Perrin. Do you hear me? Get out of Kyrian! Today! Now! I never want to see you again." Pivoting on his heel, he strode away with nobles all but throwing themselves to the floor as he passed. Perrin thumbed a trickle of blood from the corner of his mouth. For one moment there, he had been sure Rand was going to kill him. Shaking his head to rid himself of the thought, he rounded a corner and nearly ran into Loyal. With a large bundle strapped to his back and a scrip big enough to hold a sheep slung on his shoulder, the Ogier was using his long-handled axe as a walking staff. The capacious pockets of his coat bulged with the shapes of books. Loyal's tufted ears perked up at the sight of him, then suddenly drooped. His whole face drooped, eyebrows hanging on his cheeks.
"I heard, Perrin,"
he boomed sadly.
"Rand should not have done that. Quick words make long troubles. I know he'll reconsider. Tomorrow, maybe."
"It's all right," Perrin told him. "Kyrian is too polished for me anyway. I'm a blacksmith, not a courtier. By tomorrow, I'll be a long way gone."
"You and Fail could come with me. Carlden and I are going to visit the steading, Perrin. All of them. About the Waygates."
A narrow-faced, pale-haired young fellow, standing behind Loyal, stopped frowning at Perrin to frown at the Ogier. He had a scrip and a bundle, too, and a sword on his hip. Despite the blue coat, Perrin recognized one of the Ashaman. Carlden did not look pleased to recognize Perrin. Besides, his smell was cold and angry. Loyal peered down the hallway behind Perrin.
"Where is Fail?"
"She's meeting me in the stables. We had words." That was simple truth. Fail seemed to like shouting sometimes. He lowered his
That was
voice.
a rough one there.
"Loyal, I wouldn't talk about that where anyone could hear. The Waygates, I mean." Loyal snorted hard enough to make a bull jump, but he did drop his tone.
"I don't see anyone but us," he rumbled.
No one more than 2 or 3 paces beyond Carlton could have heard clearly. His ears lashed was the only word, and laid back angrily.
Having a shake. And I
Everyone's
want me to
afraid
hear
to be seen
shaking it
near
up real
you.
good.
After all you've done for
Mix it up
Rand.
real good.
Carlton
Already
tugged
mixed
at
it up
Loyal's
real
sleeve.
good, but
"We have to go," he said,
just to get a
glaring
little
at
bit more
Perrin.
mixed.
Anyone the Dragon Reborn shouted at was outside the gates, so far as he was concerned. Perrin wondered whether he was holding the power right then.
Yes, yes.
Loyal murmured, waving a ham-sized hand, but he leaned on his axe, frowning pensively.
I don't like this, Perrin. Rand chases you away. He sends me off. How am I to finish my book?
His ears twitched, and he coughed.
Well, that's neither here nor there. But you, me, and the light only knows where Matt is. He'll send Min away next. He hid from her this morning. He sent me out to tell her he wasn't there. I think she knew I was lying. He'll be alone then, Perrin. It's terrible to be alone. That's what he said to me. He is planning to send all of his friends away.
The wheel weaves as
Hell
the
yeah,
wheel
Sword.
wills.
No
Perrin said.
problem.
Loyal blinked at that echo of Moraine. Perrin had been thinking of her a lot recently. She had been a restraining influence on Rand. Farewell, Loyal. Keep safe. And don't trust anyone you don't have to. He did not quite look at Carlton.
You don't mean that, Perrin.
Loyal sounded shocked. He seemed to trust everyone.
You cannot. Come with me, you and Fail.
We'll meet again one day, Perrin told him gently, and hurried past before he had to say more. He did not like lying, especially not to a friend. In the north stable, things were much the same as inside the palace. Grooms saw him walk in and
I'll
drop
be right
dung
back.
forks and curry combs, crowding out through small doors at the back. Rustles in the loft high above that might have escaped another's ears told of folk hiding there. He could hear anxious, fearful breaths. He brought Stepper out of a green-streaked marble stall, slipped on his bridle, and tied the dun stallion to a gilded hitching ring. He went to fetch blanket and saddle from a marble tack room, where half the saddles were mounted with silver or gold. The stable fit very well in a palace, with tall square marble columns and a marble floor, even under the straw in the stalls. He rode out, glad to see the back of grandeur. North of the city, he followed the road he had come down so desperately with Rand just a few days before. Rode until folds in the land hid Kyrian. Then he turned off to the east, where a fair patch of forest remained, running down one tall hill and over the next taller one. Just inside the trees, Fail booted Swallow to meet him, Aram heeling her like a hound on his own horse. At the sight of him, though that was not saying much, he merely divided his faithful hound looks between him and Fail. "Husband," she said, not too coolly, but razor-sharp anger and spiky jealousy still threaded through the clean scent of her and her herbal soap. She was garbed for
Coming here
travel,
looks
with
all
a thin
smoky.
dust cloak hanging down her back, and red gloves that matched the boots peeking out beneath the dark, narrow riding skirts
I need
she
to air
favored.
it out, boy.
No fewer than
Dog
4
look-
sheathed daggers
Snoopy's
were
looking at me
tucked
like,
behind her belt.
really gotta smoke it out like that.
Movement behind her turned into Bane and Chiad, and Sulin with a dozen more maidens. Perrin's eyebrows rose. He wondered what Gaul thought of that. The Aielman had said he was looking forward to getting Bane and Chiad alone. Even more surprising were Fail's other companions. "What are they doing here?" He nodded toward a small cluster who held their horses back. He recognized Salanda and Camille, and the tall Tyran woman, all still in men's clothes and wearing swords. The blocky fellow in a fat-sleeved coat, who had kept his beard oiled and trimmed to a point despite wearing his hair tied back with a ribbon, also looked familiar. The other 2 men, both Carianan, he did not know, but he could guess, by their youth and the ribbon tying their hair, if nothing else, that they were part of Solanda's society. "I took Solanda and a few of her friends into my service." Fail spoke lightly, but suddenly she gave off foggy waves of caution. They would have gotten themselves into trouble in the city sooner or later. They need someone to give them direction. Think of them as charity. I won't let them get under your feet. Perrin sighed and scratched his beard. A wise man did not tell his wife to her face that she was hiding things, especially when that wife was Fail. She was going to be as formidable as her mother, if she was not already. Under his feet? How many of these puppies had she taken on? Is everything ready? Pretty soon some idiot back there will decide he can curry favor by bringing Rand my head. I'd like to be gone before that. Aram growled in his throat. No one is going to take your head, husband. Fail showed white teeth and went on in a whisper she knew he would catch. Except perhaps me. In a normal voice, she said, All is ready. In a clear, fairly flat hollow beyond the trees, the two rivers men stood beside their horses, a column of twos that wound out of sight around the side of the hill. Perrin sighed again. The red wolf-head banner and the red eagle of Manetherin stirred slightly in a hot breeze at the head of the column. Maybe another dozen maidens squatted on their heels near the banners. On the other side, Gaul wore as close to a sullen expression as Perrin had ever seen on an Aiel. As he dismounted, two black-coated men came to him, saluting with fist pressed to heart. Lord Perrin, Jerk Grady said, we've been here since last night. We are ready. Grady's weathered farmer's face made Perrin almost comfortable with him. But Fajan Neild was another matter. Maybe 10 years younger than Grady, he might have been a farmer too, for all Perrin knew, but he affected airs and graces and wore his pitiful mustache, waxed to a semblance of points. Where Grady was one of the dedicated, he was a soldier, without the silver sword pinned to his collar, but that did not hold him back from speaking. Lord Perrin, is it really necessary to take those women with us? There'll be nothing but trouble. They will. The whole lot of them, and you know it well. Some of the women he was talking about stood not far from the Two Rivers men, shawls looped over their arms. Idara appeared the eldest of the 6 wise ones, impassively watching the 2 women Neild had nodded to. In truth, that pair worried Perrin as well. Sionid Trigon, all coolness and reserve in green silk, had been haughtily trying to ignore the Aiel women. Most Karianen, who were not pretending to be Aiel, despised them. But when she saw Perrin, she shifted her bay's reins to the other hand and gave Masuri Sakawa a nudge in the ribs. Masuri started. Browns seemed to go off in daydreams fairly often. Stared at the Green Sister blankly, then directed her stare at Perrin. This one was more the sort she might have given some peculiar and perhaps dangerous animal. One she intended to be sure of before she was done. They had sworn to obey Randall Thor, but how would they do obeying Perrin Ebara? Giving orders to Aes Sedai seemed unnatural, but better than the other way around at least. Everybody comes, Perrin said. Let's be gone before we are seen. Fael sniffed. Grady and Neild saluted again and strode out to the middle of the treeless area. Perrin had no idea which of them did what was necessary, but suddenly the now familiar silvery vertical flash in the air rotated into a gateway, not quite tall enough to ride through. Trees showed beyond the opening, not that much different from those in the surrounding hills. Grady strode through immediately, but even so, he was nearly knocked down by Sulin and a small horde of veiled maidens. They seemed to have taken the honor of being first through a gateway for themselves, and were not about to let anyone usurp it. Foreseeing 100 problems he had not thought of, Perrin led Stepper through into a land not so hilly. There was no clearing, but it was not so thickly treed as the hollow back in Carian either. The scattered trees were taller, but just as sere, even the pines. He did not recognize much else except for oak and leatherleaf. The air seemed a little hotter. Fael followed him, but when he turned to the left, she took Swallow right. Aram's head swung wordly between them until Perrin nodded toward his wife. The one-time tinker hauled his gelding after her, but quick as he was not before Bane and Chiad, still veiled, and, for all Perrin's orders that the Two Rivers men were to be next, Salanda and a good 24 young Carianan and Tyrans poured out of the gateway, drawing their horses along. 24. Shaking his head, Perrin stepped beside Grady, who turned this way and that, studying the sparse woodland. Gall came stalking up as Daniel finally began leading the Two Rivers men out at a run, pulling their horses. Those bloody banners appeared right behind Daniel, going up as soon as they were clear. The men ought to shave those fool mustaches. Women are beyond any belief, Gall muttered. Perrin opened his mouth to defend Fail before he realized it must be Bane and Chiad the man was glaring at. To cover, he said, "Do you have a wife, Grady?" "Sora," Grady answered absently, his attention still on the surrounding trees. Perrin would have wagered he held the power now, for sure. Anyone could see a long way in this, compared to any woods back home, but someone could still sneak up on you. "She's missing me," Grady went on, almost to himself. "You learned to recognize that one right off."
No.
"I wish I knew why her knee hurts, though." "Her knee hurts," Perrin said flatly. "The minute it hurts." Grady seemed to realize Gall was too. He blinked, but went right back to his study. "Forgive me, Lord Perrin. I need to keep a watch." For a long moment he said nothing, then began slowly. "It's something a feller named Candler worked out. The Mahale doesn't like us trying to figure out things on our own, but once it was done..." His slight grimace said perhaps Taim had not been all that easy about it even then. "We think maybe it's something like the bond between Waters and Aes Sedai. Maybe 1 in 3 of us is married. Anyway, that's how many wives stayed instead of running off when they learned what their husbands were. This way, when you're apart from her, you know she's all right and she knows you are. A man likes to know his wife's safe." "That he does," Perrin said. What was Fail up to with those fools? She was mounted on Swallow now, and they were all standing close around looking up at her. He would not put it past her to leap into this Giotto nonsense herself. Sioned and Masuri glided behind the last of the Two Rivers men with the 3 warders they had between them, and the wise ones right behind them, which was no surprise. They were along to keep an eye on the Aes Sedai. Sioned gathered her reins as if to mount, but Idara said something in a low voice, pointing to a fat, lopsided oak, and the 2 Aes Sedai looked at her, heads swiveling as one, then exchanged glances and led their horses to the tree. Matters would go a deal smoother if that pair was always so meek. Well, not meek exactly. Sioned's neck was stiff as a rod. After that came the remounts, a herd of spare horses tied 10 to a lead, under the watchful eyes of folk from Dobrain's estates, who supposedly knew what they were about. Perrin automatically picked out Stair, on a lead by himself. The woman taking care of him better know what she was doing. A great many high-wheeled supply carts came through, drivers tugging the horses and shouting as if they feared the gateway might close on them. A great many because carts could not carry as much as wagons, and carts because a wagon and team would not fit through the gateway. It seemed neither Nield nor Grady could make one as big as Rand could, or Dashiva. When the last cart finally trundled out on a squealing axle, Perrin considered ordering the gateway closed right then. But Nield was the man holding the thing open, and him on the other side of it back in Kyrian. A moment later, it was too late. Barrelane strode through, leading a mare as white as Swallow was black, and he offered up small thanks that her gray riding dress had a neck right to her chin. On the other hand, from the waist up, it fit as snugly as any Terrabonner dress. Perrin groaned. With her came Norella and Bertain Galena, the Lord Captain of her winged guards, a gray-haired fellow who wore his black eye patch as another man might a plume in his hat. And then the red-armored winged guards themselves, more than 900 of them. Norella and the rest who had been at Dumais Wells wore a yellow cord tied high in the left arm. Climbing onto her mare, Berylane rode off to one side with Galena, while Narella formed the wing guards among the trees. There must have been 50 paces between her and Fail, and dozens of trees, but she placed herself where they could stare at each other. Stare with so little expression that Perrin's skin crawled. Putting Berylane at the rear, as far from Fail as he could manage, had seemed a good notion, but he was going to face this every bloody evening. Burn rammed. Now Neil popped out of the gateway, stroking his ridiculous mustache and preening for anyone who might be watching as the opening vanished. No one was, and he climbed onto his horse with a disgruntled expression.
It's okay, buddy.
Mounting Stepper, Perrin rode to a slight rise.
It's okay.
Not everyone could see him because of the trees, but it was enough they could hear. A stir ran through the assemblage as he reined in, people shifting for a better look. As far as anyone's eyes and ears back in Carian know, he said loudly, I've been banished. The first of Mayen is on her way back home, and the rest of you have just disappeared like fog in the sun. To his surprise, they laughed. A cry of Perrin Golden Eyes went up, and not just from the Two Rivers folk. He waited for it to quiet. That took a while. Fail neither laughed nor shouted, nor did Berylane. Each woman shook her head. Neither believed he should tell as much as he intended to. Then they saw each other, and those shaking heads froze as if trapped in amber. They did not like agreeing. It was no surprise when their eyes swung to him with identical expressions. There was an old saying in the Two Rivers, though how you said it and what you meant depended on circumstance and who you were. It's always a man's fault. One thing he had learned women were better at than anything else, teaching a man to sigh. Some of you may be wondering where we are and why, he went on when silence fell at last. A smaller ripple of laughter. This is Gildan. Murmurs of awe and maybe disbelief at having crossed 1,500 miles or more in a step. The first thing we have to do is convince Queen Alejandra we aren't here to invade. Berylane was supposed to talk to Alejandra, and Fail was going to give him fits for it. Then we're going to find a fellow who calls himself the Prophet of the Lord Dragon. That would not be much pleasure either. Massima had been no joy before he tipped over the edge. This prophet has been causing some problems, but we're going to let him know Randall Thor doesn't want anybody frightened into following him, and we'll take him and any of his people who want to come back to the Lord Dragon.
My blanket I use, and I have like a...
And we'll frighten the britches off Massima to do it if need be.
And then my fitted sheet.
They cheered. They whooped and shouted that they would march this prophet back to Carian for the Lord Dragon, so Perrin hoped this spot was even farther from their village than it was supposed to be. Even the cart drivers and horse handlers joined in. More than that, he prayed that everything went smoothly and quickly. The sooner he could put as much distance as possible between Berylane and himself and Fail, the better. No surprises. That was what he wanted once they rode south. It was about time his being Taviran showed itself good for something. Chapter 28. Bread and Cheese. Matt knew he was in trouble from the day he moved into the Tarasin Palace. He could have refused. Just because the flaming dice started or stopped did not mean he had to do anything. Usually when they stopped spinning, it was too late not to do something. The problem was, he wanted to know why. Before very many days, he wished he had taken his curiosity by the throat and throttled it. After Nynaeve and Elaine left his room, once he could manage to reach his feet without his head falling off, he spread the word among his men. Nobody seemed to see the disadvantages. He just wanted to prepare them, but nobody listened. Very good, my lord, Nera murmured, tugging Matt's boot onto his foot. My lord will finally have decent rooms. Oh, very good. For a moment, he seemed to lose his mournful expression. For just a moment. I will brush the red silk coat for my lord. My lord has stained the blue rather badly with wine. Matt waited impatiently, put on the coat, and headed down the hall.
Aes Sedai,
Elysian muttered as his head popped out of the top of a clean shirt.
buddy?
His
You
round-bellied
okay?
manservant, Lopin, was hovering behind him.
That stupid
burn
guy,
my
he got in
soul, I
trouble.
don't much like Aes
So I was trying
Sedai,
to get
but
him
the Tarson
out of
Palace,
the way
Matt.
so I could get
Matt
the whole bed
winced.
stripped.
Bad enough the man could drink a
So
barrel
he's
of brandy with no
all
effect the
sad
next
right
morning,
now too.
but did he have to grin so? Ah, Matt. Now we can forget dice and play cards with our own kind. He meant nobles, the only ones who could afford to play, except for well-to-do merchants who would not remain well-to-do long if they began betting for the stakes nobles did. Milesian rubbed his hands briskly while Lopin tried to settle his laces. Even his beard seemed eager. Silk sheets, he murmured. Who ever heard of silk sheets? Those old memories nudged, but Matt refused to listen. Full of nobles, Vannon growled downstairs, pursing his lips to spit. His glance searching for Mistress Annan was automatic now. He decided instead to swallow from the mug of rough wine that was his breakfast. Be good to see the Lady Elaine again, though, he mused. His free hand rose as if to knuckle his forehead. He did not seem aware of the gesture. Matt groaned. That woman had ruined a good man. You want me to look in on Karadin again? Bannon went on, as if the rest was unimportant. His street's so full of beggars, it's hard to see anything. But he has an awful lot of folk come to call. Matt told him that would be fine. No wonder Bannon did not care whether the palace was full of nobles and Aes Sedai. He would spend the day sweating in the sun and jostled by the crowds. Much more comfortable. There was no point trying to warn Harnan and the rest of the Red Arms, all shoveling down white porridge and tiny black sausages while they nudged one another in the ribs and laughed about the serving women in the palace, who, they had heard, were all chosen for their beauty and remarkably free with their favors. A true fact, they kept assuring themselves. Things did not get any better when he went into the kitchens searching for Mistress Annan to settle the bill. Kyra was there, but with all her bad temper of the night before, doubled. She stuck out her lower lip, glowering at him, and stalked out the door to the stable yard, rubbing the back of her skirt. Maybe she had gotten herself into some misery or other, but how she could blame Matt Coughlin was beyond him. Mistress Annan was out, it seemed. She was always organizing soup kitchens for refugees or leaping into some other good work, but Enid was waving a long wooden spoon at her scurrying helpers and ready to take his coin in her stout hand. You squeeze too many melons, my young lord, and you shouldn't be surprised when a rotten one breaks in your hand, she said darkly for some reason. Or two, she added after a moment, nodding. She leaned close, tilting up her sweating round face with an intense stare. You'll only make trouble for yourself if you say a word. You won't. That did not sound like a question. Not a word, Matt said. What in the light was she talking about? It seemed the right response, though, because she nodded and waddled away, waving that spoon twice as vigorously as before. For a moment, he had thought she meant to thump him with it. The pure truth was, women all had a violent streak, not just some of them. One thing and another, it was a relief when Narum and Lopin got into a shouting match over whose master's baggage would be carried over first. Smoothing their feathers required a good half an hour from him and Elysian both. A manservant with his dander ruffled could make your life miserable. Then he had to settle which of the Red Arms were to have the honor of lugging the chest of gold across, and which were to take the horses. Anyway, it was that much longer outside the bloody Tarson Palace. Once he was ensconced in his new rooms, though, he almost forgot troubles at first. He had a large sitting room and a small, what they called a sulking room hereabouts, and an immense bedchamber with the biggest bed he had ever seen, the massive bedposts carved with entwined flowers of all things and painted red. Most of the furniture was bright red or bright blue, where it was not layered with gilt. A small door near the bed led to a cramped room for Narum, which the fellow seemed to think was excellent despite a narrow bed and no window. Matt's rooms all had tall arched windows letting onto white wrought iron balconies that overlooked the Mulhara. The stand lamps were gilded, and
What do
so
you
were the
say?
mirror frames.
It's okay.
There
What
were
do you say,
2
buddy?
mirrors in the sulking room,
No?
3
Okay.
in the sitting room, and 4 in the bedchamber. The clock, a clock, on the marble mantel above the fireplace in the sitting room sparkled with gilt as well. The wash basin and pitcher were red Seafolk porcelain. He was almost disappointed to discover that the chamber pot under the bed was only plain white pottery. There was even a shelf in the large sitting room with a full dozen books. Not that he read much. Even given the jarring colors of walls and ceilings and floor tiles, the rooms shouted rich. Any other time, he would have danced a jig. Any time when he was not aware that a woman with chambers right down the hall wanted to stick him in hot water and put a bellows to the fire. If Teslin or Merlilla or one of that lot did not manage it first, despite his medallion. Why have the dice in his head stopped tumbling as soon as Elaine mentioned these bloody rooms? Curiosity. He had heard a saying on several women's lips back home, usually when he had done something that looked fun at the time. Men teach cats curiosity, but cats keep sense for themselves. I'm no bloody cat, he muttered, stalking out of the bedchamber into the sitting room. He just had to know. That was all. Of course you're not a cat, Tylan said. You're a succulent little duckling is what you are. Matt gave a start and stared. Duckling? And a little duckling at that. The woman stood well short of his shoulder. Indignation or no indignation, he managed an elegant bow anyway. She was the queen. He had to remember that. Majesty, thank you for these wonderful apartments. I'd love to talk with you, but I have to go out and... Smiling, she advanced across the red and green floor tiles, layered blue and white silk petticoats swishing, large dark eyes fixed on him. He had no desire at all to look at the marriage knife nestled in her generous cleavage, or the larger, gem-studded dagger thrust behind an equally gem-studded belt. He backed away. Majesty, I have an important... She started humming. He recognized the tune. He had hummed it to a few girls lately. He was wise enough not to try actually singing with his voice, and besides, the words they used in Abu Dar would have singed his ears. Around here, they called it, I will steal your breath with kisses. Laughing nervously, he tried to put a lapis inlaid table between them, but she somehow got around it first without seeming to increase her speed. Majesty, She laid a hand flat on his chest, back-heeled him into a
That's all
high-backed
I'm
chair,
doing is,
and plumped herself down on his lap.
it's okay.
Between her
He's
and the
still
chair
pumpy.
arms, he was trapped.
I think he mainly did it in,
Oh, he could have picked her up and
while
set
he
her on her
was
feet
asleep.
quite
He
easily,
didn't actually stand up
except
and
that
do
she
it.
did have that bloody big dagger in her belt, and he doubted his manhandling her would be as acceptable to her as her manhandling him seemed to be.
I'll be right back.
This was Abu Dar,
Come
after
here,
all,
Ozzy.
where a woman killing a man was justified until proven otherwise. He could have picked her up easily, except he had seen fishmongers in the city selling peculiar creatures called squid and octopus. Abu Dari actually ate the things. But they had nothing on Tylan. The woman possessed 10 hands. He thrashed about, vainly trying to fend her off, and she laughed softly. Between kisses, he breathlessly protested that someone might walk in, and she just chuckled. He babbled his respect for her crown, and she chortled. He claimed betrothal to a girl back home who held his heart in her hands. She really laughed at that. What she does not know cannot harm her, she murmured, her 20 hands not slowing for an instant. Someone knocked at the door. Prying his mouth free, he shouted, "Who is it?" Well, it was a shout. A high-pitched shout. He was out of breath, after all. Tylan was off his lap and 3 paces away so fast it seemed she was just here, then there. The woman had the nerve to give him a reproachful look, and then she made a kiss at him. That barely left her lips before the door opened and Tom stuck his head in.
Matt? I wasn't sure that was you. Oh, Majesty.
For a scrawny old gleeman with pretensions, Tom could flourish a bow at the best in spite of his limp. Julian could not, but he snatched off his ridiculous red hat and did what he could.
Forgive us. We won't disturb.
Tom began, but Matt broke in hurriedly. Come in, Tom. Snatching his coat back on all the way, he started to stand, then realized that somehow the bloody woman had untied the waist of his breeches without him noticing. These two might miss that his shirt was undone to his belly, but they would not miss his breeches falling off. Tylen's blue dress was not mussed at all. Julian, come in. I am glad you find the rooms acceptable, Master Cawthon, Tylen said, dignity incarnate. Except for her eyes, anyway. When she stood so Tom and Julian could not see them. Her eyes laced innocuous words with added meaning. I look forward to having your company with pleasure. I shall find it interesting, having a Taviran where I can reach out and touch him at will. But I must leave you to your friends now. No, do not stare, please. That with just the hint of a mocking smile. Well, boy, Tom said, knuckling his mustaches when she was gone, there's luck for you, being welcomed with open arms by the Queen herself. Julian became very interested in his cap. Matt eyed them warily, mentally daring them to say a word more. Just one word. But once he asked after Nynaeve and Elaine, he quit worrying what they suspected. The women were not back. He almost leaped up, breeches or no. They were trying to wiggle out of their agreement already. He had to explain what he meant in between their outbursts of incredulity, in between expressing his opinions of Nynaeve Bloody Almira and Elaine Bloody Daughter Heir. Not much chance they would have gone off to the Rahad without him, but he would not put it past them to try their hands spying on Karadin. Elaine would demand a confession and expect the man to break down. Nynaeve would try to beat one out of him. I doubt they are bothering Karadin, Julian said, scratching behind his ear. I believe Avienda and Brigitte are taking a look at him, from what I heard. We didn't see them go. I do not think you need to worry about him knowing what he's seeing, even if he walks right by them. Tom, pouring himself a golden goblet of wine punch that Matt had found waiting, took up the explanation. Matt put a hand over his eyes. Disguises made with the power. No wonder they had slipped away like snakes whenever they wanted. Those women were going to make trouble. That was what women did best. It hardly surprised him to learn that Tom and Julian knew less about this bowl of winds than he did. After they left to ready themselves for a trip to the Rahad, he had time to set his clothes to rights before Nynaeve and Elaine came back. He had time to check on Oliver in his room one floor down. The boy's skinny frame had fleshed out somewhat, with Enid and the rest of the cooks at the Wandering Woman stuffing him, but he would always be short, even for a Kyrianan. And if his ears shrank to half their size and his mouth to half its width, his nose would still stop him well short of handsome. No fewer than 3 serving women fussed over him while they sat cross-legged on his bed. Matt, don't you think Hazel has the most beautiful eyes? Oliver said, beaming at the big-eyed young woman Matt had met the last time he came to the palace. She beamed back and ruffled the boy's hair. Oh, but Alice and Loya are so sweet, I could never choose. A plump woman just short of her middle years looked up from unpacking Oliver's saddlebags to give him a broad grin, and a slender girl with bee-stung lips patted the towel she had just put on his washstand, then flung herself onto the bed to tickle Oliver's ribs till he fell over laughing helplessly. Matt snorted. Harnan and that lot were bad enough, but now these women were encouraging the boy. How was he ever going to learn to behave if women did that? Oliver ought to be playing in the streets like any other 10-year-old. He had had no serving women falling over him in his rooms. Tylen had seen to that, he was sure. He had time to check on Oliver and to look in on Harnan and the rest of the Red Arms, sharing a long room lined with beds not far from the stables, and to saunter down to the kitchen for some bread and beef, He had not been able to face that porridge back at the inn. Still, Nynaeve and Elaine had not returned. He finally looked over the books in his sitting room and began reading the travels of Jane Farstrider, though he barely made out a word for worrying. Tom and Julian came in, just as the women finally bustled in, exclaiming over finding him there, as if they thought he would not keep his word. He closed the book gently, set it gently on the table beside his chair. "Where have you been?" "Why, we went for a walk," Elaine said brightly, blue eyes wider than he remembered seeing before. Tom frowned and produced a knife from his sleeve, rolling it back and forth through his fingers. He very markedly did not so much as glance at Elaine. "We had some tea with some women your innkeeper knows," Nynaeve said. "I won't bore you with talk about needlework." Julian started to shake his head, then stopped before she noticed. "Please, don't bore me," Matt said dryly. He supposed she knew one end of a needle from the other, but he suspected she would as soon stick one through her tongue as talk about needlework. Neither woman cracked her teeth about civility, confirming his worst suspicions. "I've told off 2 fellows to walk out with each of you this afternoon, and there will be 2 more tomorrow and every day. If you're not inside the palace or under my nose, you'll have bodyguards. They know their turns already. They'll stay with you at all times. All times. And you will let me know where you're headed. No more making me worried till my hair falls out." He expected indignation and argument. He expected weaseling over what they had or had not promised. He expected that demanding this whole loaf might get him a slice at the end, a butt slice if his luck was in. Nynaeve looked at Elaine. Elaine looked at Nynaeve. "Why, bodyguards are a wonderful idea, Matt," Elaine exclaimed, her cheek dimpling in a smile. "I suppose you were right about that. It's very smart of you to have your men all ready to a schedule." "It is a wonderful notion," Nynaeve said, nodding enthusiastically. "Very smart of you, Matt." Tom dropped the knife with a muffled curse and sat sucking on a nicked finger, staring at the women. Matt sighed. Trouble. He had known it. And that was before they had told him to forget the Rahad for the time being. Which was how he found himself on a bench in front of a cheap tavern not far from the riverfront called the Rose of the Elbar, drinking from one of the dented tin cups chained to the bench. At least they washed the cups out for each new patron. The stink from a dyer shop across the way only raised the style of the Rose. Not that it was a shabby neighborhood, really, though the street was too narrow for carriages. A fair number of brightly lacquered sedan chairs swayed through the crowd. If far more passers-by wore wool and perhaps a guild vest than silk, the wool was as often well cut as frayed. The houses and shops were the usual array of white plaster, and if most were small and even run down, the tall house of a wealthy merchant stood on a corner to his right, and on the left, a diminutive palace, smaller than the merchant's house at least, with a single green-banded dome and no spire. A pair of taverns and an inn in plain sight looked cool and inviting. Unfortunately, the Rose was the only one where a man could sit outside, the only one in just the right spot. Unfortunately. "I doubt I've ever seen such splendid flies," Elysian grumbled, waving away several choice specimens from his cup. "What is it we're doing again?" "You are swilling that foul excuse for wine and sweating like a goat," Matt muttered, tucking his hat to shade his eyes better. "I am being Taviran." He glared at the dilapidated house between the dyer's and a noisy weaver's establishment that he had been told to watch. Not asked, told. That was what it came to, however they phrased it, squirming around their pledges. Oh, they made it sound like asking, made it sound like pleading at the end, which he would believe when dogs danced. But he knew when he had been bullied. "Just be Taviran, Matt," he mimicked. "I know you'll just know what to do." Bah! Maybe Elaine bloody daughter heir and her bloody dimple knew, or Nynaeve with her bloody hands twitching to yank her bloody braid, but he would be burned if he did. If the pig-kissing bowl is in the Rahad, how am I supposed to find it on this flaming side of the river? I do not remember them saying, Julian said wryly, and took a long swallow of some drink made from a yellow fruit grown in the countryside. You have asked that 50 times at least. He claimed the pale drink was refreshing in the heat, but Matt had taken a bite of one of those lemons, and he was not about to swallow anything made from them. With his head still throbbing faintly, he himself drank tea. It tasted as if the tavern keeper, a scrawny fellow with beady, suspicious eyes, had been dumping new leaves and water in yesterday's leavings since the founding of the city. The taste suited his mood. What interests me, Tom murmured over steepled fingers, is why they asked so many questions about your innkeeper. He did not seem very upset at the women still keeping secrets. Sometimes he was decidedly odd. What do Satala Anand and these women have to do with the bowl? Women did pass in and out of the dilapidated house. A steady stream of women, just about. Some well-dressed, if not in silks, and not one man. 3 or 4 wore the red belt of a wise woman. Matt had considered following some of them when they left, but it felt too planned. He did not know how Taviran worked. He had never really seen any sign of it in himself, but his luck was always best when everything was random. Like with dice. Most of those little iron tavern puzzles eluded him, however lucky he felt. He ignored Tom's question. Tom asked it at least as often as Matt had asked how he was to find the bowl here. Nynaeve had told him to his face she had not promised to tell him every last thing she knew. She said she would tell him whatever he needed to know. She said. Watching her nearly choke from not calling him names was not nearly enough vengeance. I suppose I should take a walk down the alley, Elysian sighed, in case one of those women decides to climb over the garden wall. The narrow gap between the house and the dyer lay in full view for its whole length. But another alleyway ran along behind the shops and houses. Matt, tell me again why we're doing this instead of playing cards. I'll do it, Matt said. Maybe he would find out how Taviran worked behind the garden wall. He went and found out nothing. By the time twilight began creeping over the street and Harnan came with a bald-headed, narrow-eyed Andoran named Watt, the only possible effect of being Taviran he had seen was that the tavern keeper brewed a fresh pot of tea. It tasted almost as bad as the old. Back in his rooms in the palace, he found a note, an invitation of sorts, elegantly lettered on thick white paper that smelled like a garden of flowers. My little rabbit, I expect to have you for dinner tonight in my apartments. No signature, but he hardly needed one. Light, the woman had no shame at all. There was a red-painted iron lock on the door to the corridor. He found the key and locked it. Then, for good measure, he jammed a chair under the latch on the door to Naram's room. He could do well enough without supper. Just as he was about to climb into bed, the lock rattled. Out in the hall, a woman laughed at finding the door secured. He should have been able to sleep soundly then, but for some reason he lay there listening to his belly grumble. Why was she doing this? Well, he knew why, but why him? Surely she had not decided to toss all decency over the barn just to bet at Taviran. He was safe now, anyway. Hylan would not batter down the door, after all. Would she? Not even most birds could get in through the wrought iron arabesques screening the balconies. Besides, she would need a long ladder to reach that high, and men to carry it. Unless she climbed down from the roof on a rope. Or she could... The night passed, his stomach rumbled, the sun rose, and he never closed his eyes or had a decent thought. Except that he did make a decision. He thought of a use for the sulking room. He certainly never sulked. At first light, he sneaked out of his rooms and found another of the palace servants he remembered, a balding fellow named Madik, with a smug, self-satisfied air and a shy twist to his mouth, that said he was not satisfied at all. A man who could be bought. Though the startled look that flashed across his square face and the smirk he barely bothered to hide said he knew exactly why Matt was slipping gold into his hand. Blood and ashes. How many people knew what Tylen was up
Curled
to?
up to lay down again.
Nynaeve and Elaine did not seem to, thank the light. Though that did mean they chided him about missing dinner with the Queen, which they had learned about when Tylen inquired whether he was ill. And worse. Please, Elaine said, smiling almost as if the word did not pain her. You must put your best foot forward with the Queen. Don't be nervous. You'll enjoy an evening with her. Just don't do anything to offend her, Nynaeve muttered. There was no doubt with her that being civil hurt. Her brows drew down in concentration, her jaw tightened, and her hands trembled to pull her braid. Be accommodating for once in your... I mean to say, remember she's a decent woman, and don't try any of your... Like you know what I mean. Nervous? Ha! Decent woman? Ha! Neither seemed the least concerned that he had wasted a whole afternoon. Elaine patted his shoulder sympathetically and asked him please to try another day or two. It certainly was better than tramping through the Rahad in this heat. Nynaeve said the exact same thing, the way women did, but without the shoulder pat. They admitted right out that they intended to spend the day trying to spy on Karadin with Avienda, though they evaded his question of who it was they thought they might recognize. Nynaeve let that slip, and Elaine gave her such a look he thought he might see Nynaeve's ears boxed for once. They meekly accepted his stricture not to lose sight of their bodyguards, and meekly let him see the disguises they intended to wear. Even after Tom's description, seeing the pair suddenly turn into Ebudari women in front of his eyes was almost as big a shock as their meekness. Well, Nynaeve made a sickly stab at meekness, growling when she realized he had meant what he said about the Aiel woman needing no bodyguard. But she came close. Either one of these women folding her hands and answering submissively made him nervous. Both of them together, with Avienda nodding approvingly, and he was happy to send them on their way. Just to be sure, though, he ignored their suddenly flat mouths and made them demonstrate their disguises for the men he was sending along first. Vannin leaped at the chance to be one of Elaine's guards, knuckling his forehead right and left like a fool. The fat man had not learned much watching on his own. Just as on the day before, a surprising number of people had come to call on Karadin, including some in silk, but that was not proof they were all dark friends. All said and done, the man was the White Cloak ambassador. More folk who wanted to trade into Amadisia probably went to him than to the Amadisian ambassador, whoever he or she was. Vannin did say 2 women had definitely been watching Karadin's palace too. The look on his face when Avienda suddenly turned into a third Ebudari woman was a wonder. And also an old man, you thought, though the fellow proved surprisingly spry. Vannin had not managed to get a good look at him despite spotting him 3 times. Once Vannin and the women left, Matt sent off Tom and Julian to see what they could uncover concerning Jacob Karadin and a bent, white-haired old man with an interest in dark friends. If the thief-catcher could not discover a way to trip Karadin on his face, it did not exist. And Tom seemed to have a way of putting together all the gossip and rumor in a place and filtering out the truth. All that was the easy part, of course. For 2 days, he sweated on that bench, with an occasional stroll down the alley beside the dyers, and the only thing that changed was that the tea got worse again. The wine was so bad, Nalisian began drinking ale. The first day, the tavern keeper offered fish for a midday meal, but by the smell, they had been caught last week. The second day, he offered a stew of oysters. Matt ate 5 bowls of that, despite the bits of shell. Brigida declined both. He had been surprised when she caught up to him and Elysian, hurrying across the Mulhara that first morning. The sun barely made a rim above the rooftops, but already people in carts dotted the square. I must have blinked, she laughed. I was waiting the way I thought you'd come out. If you don't mind company. We move fast sometimes, he said evasively. Nelician looked at him sideways. Of course, he had no idea why they had crept out through a tiny side door near the stables. It was not that Matt thought Tyling would actually leap on him in the halls in broad daylight, but then again, it never hurt to be careful. Your company is welcome anytime. Thanks. She just shrugged and murmured something he did not catch and fell in on the other side of him. That was the beginning with her. Any other woman he had ever known would have demanded to know thanks for what, and then explained why none were necessary at such length that he wanted to cover his ears, or upbraided him at equal length for thinking they were, or sometimes made it clear she expected something more substantial than words. Birgitta just shrugged, and over the next 2 days, something startling occurred in his head. Normally, to him, women were to admire and smile at, to dance with and kiss if they would allow, to snuggle with if he was lucky. Deciding which women to chase was almost as fun as chasing them, if not nearly so much as catching them. Some women were just friends, of course. A few. Egwene, for one, though he was not sure how that friendship would survive her becoming Amerlin. Nynaeve was sort of a friend, in a way, if she could forget for 1 hour that she had switched his bottom more than once, and remember he was not a boy anymore. But a woman friend was different from a man. You always knew her mind ran along other paths than yours, that she saw the world with different eyes. Birgitta leaned toward him on the bench. Best be wary, she murmured. That widow is looking for a new husband. The sheath on her marriage knife is blue. Besides, the house is over there. He blinked, losing sight of the sweetly plump woman who rolled her hips so extravagantly as she walked, and Birgitta answered his sheepish grin with a laugh. Nynaeve would have flayed him with her tongue for looking, and even Egwene would have been coolly disapproving. By the end of the second day on that bench, he realized he had sat all that time with his hip pressed against Brigitta's and never once thought of trying to kiss her. He was sure she did not want to be kissed by him. Frankly, considering the dog-ugly men she seemed to enjoy looking at, he might have been insulted if she had. And she was a hero out of legend whom he still half expected to leap over a house, grab a couple of the Forsaken by the neck on the way. But that was not it. He would as soon have thought of kissing Nelician. The same as the tyrant, just exactly the same as, he liked Brigitta. 2 days on that bench, up and down to trot down the alley beside the dyer and stare at the tall wall of bare brick at the back of the house's garden. Brigitta could have climbed it, but even she might have broken her neck if she tried wearing a dress. 3 times he decided on the spur of the moment to follow a woman coming out of the house, 2 wearing the red belt of a wise woman. Random chance did seem to invoke his luck. One of the wise women went around the corner and bought a bunch of shriveled turnips before going back. The other walked 2 streets over to buy a pair of big green-striped fish. The third woman, tall and dark in neat gray wool, maybe a tyrant, crossed 2 bridges before entering a large shop where she was greeted with smiles by a skinny, bowing fellow and began supervising the loading of lacquered boxes and trays into sawdust-filled baskets that were then loaded into a wagon. By what he heard, she hoped to fetch a pretty piece of silver with them in Andor. Matt barely managed to escape without buying a box. So much for random luck. No one else had any either. Nynaeve and Elaine and Avienda made their pilgrimages to the streets around Cardan's small palace without seeing anyone they recognized, which frustrated them no end. They still refused to say who. It hardly mattered, since the people were not to be seen. That was what they said, showing him enough teeth for 6 women. The grimaces were supposed to be smiles, he thought. It was a shame Avienda seemed to have fallen in with the other 2 so thoroughly, but there was a moment when he was pressing them for an answer, and Elaine snapped at him, staring down her nose, and the Aiel woman whispered something in her ear. "Forgive me, Matt," Elaine said earnestly, her face going so red her hair seemed to pale. I humbly beg pardon for speaking so. I will beg on my knees, if you wish. No surprise that her voice faltered at the end. No need for that, he said faintly, trying not to goggle. You're forgiven. It was nothing. The oddest thing, though, Elaine looked at Avienda the whole time she spoke to him, and did not twitch an eyelid when he replied, but heaved a great sigh of relief when Avienda nodded. Women were just strange. Tom reported that Carden gave to beggars frequently, and aside from that, every scrap of word about him in Abu Dar was the kind to be expected, depending on whether the speaker thought white cloaks were murderous monsters or the true saviors of the world. Julian learned that Carden had purchased a plan of the Tarasan Palace, which might indicate some white cloak intention toward Abu Dar, and might indicate that Pt.9 wanted a palace for himself and intended to copy the Tarasan, if he still lived. Rumors had sprung up in the city that he was dead, but then half said Aes Sedai had killed him, and half said Rand had, which showed their worth. Neither Julian or Tom had scuffed up a pebble concerning a white-haired old man with a much-worn face. Frustration with Carden, frustration with watching the bloody house, and as far as the palace went. Matt found out how things were to go that first night when he finally got back to his rooms. Oliver was there, already fed and curled up in a chair with the travels of Jane Farstrider by the light of the stand lamps, and not at all upset over being moved out of his own room. Medic had been as good as his word. As good as the gold he stuffed in his pouch, anyway. The sulking room now held Oliver's bed. Just let Tylen try anything with a child watching her. The Queen had not been idle either, though. He sneaked down to the kitchens like a fox, slipping from corner to corner, flashing downstairs, and found there was no food to be had. Oh, the smell of cooking permeated the air. Roasts turning on spits in the big fireplaces, pots bubbling atop the white-tiled stoves, and cooks kept popping open ovens to prod this or that. There was just no food for Matt Cawthon. Smiling women in pristine white aprons ignored his own smiles and put themselves in his way, so he could not get near the sources of those wonderful smells. They smiled and rapped his knuckles when he tried to snatch a loaf of bread or just a bit of honey-glazed turnip. They smiled and told him he must not spoil his appetite if he was to eat with the Queen. They knew. Every last one of them knew. His own blockage, as much as anything else, drove him back to his rooms, bitterly regretting that odorous fish at midday. He locked the door behind him. A woman who would starve a man might try anything. He was lying on a green silk carpet playing snakes and foxes with Oliver when the second note was slipped under his door. I have been told it is more sporting to take a pigeon on the wing, to watch it flutter. But sooner or later, a hungry bird will fly to the hand. What is it, Matt? Oliver asked. Nothing. Matt crumpled the note. Another game? Oh, yes. The boy would play the fool game all day, given a chance. Matt, did you try any of that ham they cooked tonight? I never tasted anything. Just throw the dice, Oliver. Just throw the bloody dice. Coming back for his third night in the palace, he bought bread and olives and used milk cheese on the way, which was just as well. The kitchen still had its orders. The bloody women actually laughed out loud while they wafted steaming platters of meats and fishes just beyond his reach and told him not to spoil his bloody appetite. He maintained his dignity. He did not grab a platter and run. He made his finest leg, flourishing an imaginary cloak. Gracious ladies, your warmth and hospitality overwhelm me. His withdrawal would have gone a deal better if one of the cooks had not cackled at his back. The Queen will feast on roast duckling soon enough, lad. Very droll. The other women roared so hard they must have been rolling on the floor. Very bloody droll. Bread and olives and salty cheese made a fine meal, with a little water from his washstand to wash it down. There had not been any wine punch in his room since that first day. Oliver tried to tell him about some sort of roasted fish with mustard sauce and raisins. Matt told him to practice his reading. Nobody slipped a note under his door that night. Nobody rattled the lock. He began to think things might turn for the better. Tomorrow was the Festival of Birds. From what he had heard of the costumes some people wore, men and women both, it might be possible Tylen would find herself a new duckling to chase after. Somebody might come out of that bloody house across from the Rose of the Elbar and hand him the bloody Bull of the Winds. Things just had to turn for the better. When he woke for his tired third morning in the Tarasin Palace, the dice were rolling in his head. Chapter 29. The Festival of Birds. Waking to the dice, Matt considered going back to sleep until they went away. But at last he got up feeling grumpy. As if he did not have more than enough on his plate already. He chased Narum away and dressed himself, eating the last of the bread and cheese from the night before while he did, then went to check on Oliver. The boy flashed between bursts of yanking on his clothes in a hurry to be out and stopping entirely with boot and
Hey,
shirt in
Ozark,
hand.
how you doing, bro?
About dozens of questions that Matt answered with half a mind. No, they would not go racing today, and never mind the rich races at the Circuit of Heaven north of the city. Maybe they could go see the menagerie. Yes, Matt would buy him a feathered mask for the festival, if he ever got dressed.
Not
That sent him
much,
into a
just
flurry.
chilling and smoking.
What really occupied Matt's thoughts were those bloody dice. Why had they started up again? He still did not know why they had before. When Oliver was finally clothed, he followed Matt into the sitting room, bubbling with half-heard questions, and bumped him from behind when he stopped dead. Tylen replaced the book Oliver had been reading the night before on the table. Majesty! Matt's eyes darted to the door he had locked last night, now standing wide open. What a surprise! He pulled Oliver around in front of him, between him and the woman's mocking smile. Well, maybe it was not really mocking, but it surely seemed
I'm
so
still
right then.
working on that same one.
She was certainly pleased with
I've been
herself.
slacking.
I was about to take Oliver out to see the festival and some traveling menagerie. He wants
I've
a
been
feathered mask.
slacking on it big time.
He snapped his mouth shut to stop babbling and started edging
That's
toward
because
the door, using the
I
boy
have
as a
these
shield.
glasses, but my
Yes,
bifocal
Tylen
ones that I
murmured,
actually wear to
watching through her
do it,
eyelashes.
the frames
She made
are
no move to
broken,
intervene,
so I
but
gotta
her
get some
smile
money together
deepened,
to
as if she was
get new
just waiting
frames
for his
for 'em,
foot to land in the
because
snare.
I can't use these because
Much
I
better
can't.
if he has a companion instead of running
I
with the
can't see that
urchins, as
close
I
with
hear
them,
he
so I have to
does.
take them off and
One
do
hears
it,
a good
so
deal about your lad.
that and
Rosella?
the size that I
A woman
ordered of
appeared in
it
the
is
doorway, and Matt gave a start. A fanciful mask of
it's
swirling
not.
blue
It's
and
one.
golden
It's gonna be the
feathers
first
hid
one I've
most of
done that
Rosella's face,
size, and it's
but the feathers on the rest of her costume
it's on the
did not
tad
hide
on
very
the
much else.
intimidating side.
She possessed the most spectacular bosom he had ever seen. Oliver, she said, sinking to her knees, would you like to walk out with me at festival? She held up a mask like a red and green hawk, just the right size for a boy. Before Matt could open his mouth, Oliver broke free and rushed to her. Oh, yes, please. Thank you. The ungrateful little lout laughed as she tied the hawk
I've been
mask on
really
his face
slacking on it.
and hugged him to her bosom.
It's actually
Hand in
almost
hand,
going
they
on a
ran
year
out,
that I've been working on
leaving
that
Matt
thing.
gaping. He recovered himself quickly enough when
Disappointing
Tylen
myself
said,
on that.
Well, for you, I am not a jealous woman, my sweet. She produced the long iron key to his door from behind her gold and silver belt, and then another just like it, waggling the pair at him. People always keep keys in a box near the door. That was where he had left his. And no one ever thinks there might be a second key. One key went back behind her belt. The other was turned in the lock with a loud click before joining its fellow. Now, lambkin, she smiled. It was too much. The woman hounded him, tried to starve him. Now she locked them in together like he did not know what. Lambkin? Those bloody dice were bouncing around in his skull. Besides, he had important business to see to. The dice had never had anything to do with finding something, but he reached her in 2 long strides, seized her arm, and began fumbling in her belt for the keys. I don't have bloody time for... His breath froze as the sharp point of her dagger beneath his chin shut his mouth and drove him right up onto his toes. Remove your hand, she said coldly. He managed to look down his nose at her face. She was not smiling now. He let go of her arm carefully. She did not lessen the pressure of her blade, though. She shook her head. I do try to make allowances for you being an outlander, Gosling. But since you wish to play roughly, hands at your sides. Move. The knife point gave a direction. He shuffled backward on tiptoe rather than have his neck sliced. What are you going to do? He mumbled through his teeth. A stretched neck put a strain in his voice. A stretched neck, among other things. Well, he could try grabbing her wrist. He was quick with his hands.
I'll be right back.
What are you going to do? Quick enough with the knife already at his throat. That was the question. That, and the one he asked her. If she intended to kill him, a shove of her wrist right there would drive the dagger straight up into his brain. Will you answer me? That was not panic in his voice. He was not in panic. Majesty? Tylen? Well, maybe he was in a bit of a panic, to use her name. You could call any woman in Ebudar duckling or pudding all day, and she would smile. But use her name before she said you could, and you found a hotter reception than you would for goosing a strange woman on the street anywhere else. A few kisses exchanged were never enough for permission either. Tylen did not answer, only kept him tiptoeing backward until suddenly his shoulders bumped against something that stopped him. With that flaming dagger never easing a hair, he could not move his head. But his eyes, that had been focused on her face, darted. They were in the bedchamber, a flower-carved red bedpost hard between his shoulder blades. Why would she bring him? His face was suddenly as crimson as the bedpost. No, she could not mean to. It was not decent. It was not possible. You can't do this to me, he mumbled at her, and if his voice was a touch breathy and shrill, he surely had cause. Watch and learn, my kitten, Tylen said, and drew her marriage knife. Afterward, a considerable time later, he irritably pulled the sheet up to his chest. A silk sheet. Nelisian had been right. The Queen of Altara hummed happily beside the bed, arms twisted behind her to do up the buttons of her dress. All he had on was the fox-head medallion on its cord, much good that had done, and the black scarf tied around his neck. A ribbon on her present, the bloody woman called it. He rolled over and snatched his silver-mounted pipe and tobacco pouch from the small table on the other side from her. Golden tongs and a hot coal and a golden bowl of sand provided the means for lighting. Folding his arms, he puffed away as fiercely as he frowned. You should not flounce, duckling, and you shouldn't pout. She yanked her dagger from where it was driven into a bedpost beside her marriage knife, examining the point before sheathing it. What is the matter? You know you enjoyed yourself as much as I did, and I... She laughed suddenly and oh so richly, resheathing the marriage knife as well. If that is part of what being Taviran means, you must be very popular. Matt flushed like fire. It isn't natural, he burst out, yanking the pipe stem from between his teeth.
I'm back.
I'm the one who's supposed to do the chasing. Her astonished eyes
night,
surely mirrored his own.
And definitely appreciate you
Had
stopping
Tylen
by.
been a tavern maid who smiled the right way, he might have tried his luck. Well, if the tavern maid lacked a son who liked poking holes in people. But he was the one who chased. He had just never thought of it that way before. He had never had the need to before. Tylen began laughing, shaking her head and wiping at her eyes with her fingers. Oh, Pigeon, I do keep forgetting. You are in Ebudar now. I left a little present for you in the sitting room. She patted his foot through the sheet. Eat well today. You are going to need your strength. Matt put a hand over his eyes and tried very hard not to weep. When he uncovered them, she was gone. Climbing out of the bed, he tucked the sheet around him. For some reason, the notion of walking around bare felt uncomfortable. The bloody woman might leap out of the wardrobe. The garments he had been wearing lay on the floor. Why bother with laces, he thought sourly, when you can just cut somebody's clothes off? She had no call to slice up his red coat that way, though. She had just enjoyed peeling him with her knife. Not quite holding his breath, he pulled open the tall red and gilt wardrobe. She was not hiding inside. His choices were limited. Naram had most of his coats for cleaning or mending. Dressing quickly, he chose a plain coat of dark bronze silk, then stuffed the sliced rags as far under the bed as he could reach until he could dispose of them without Naram seeing. Or anyone else, for that matter. Too many people already knew entirely too much of what was going on between him and Tylen. There was no way he could face anybody knowing this. In the sitting room, he lifted the lid of the lacquerware box by the door, then let it fall with a sigh. He had not really expected Tylen to replace the key. He leaned against the door, the unlocked door. Light, what was he going to do? Move back to the inn? Burn why the dice had stopped before. Only he would not put it past Tylen to bribe Mistress Anan and Enid, or the innkeeper wherever he went. He would not put it past Nynaeve and Elaine to claim he had broken some agreement and put an end to their promises. Burn all women. A large parcel, elaborately wrapped in green paper, sat on one of the tables. It contained an eagle mask in black and gold, and a coat covered with feathers to match. There was also a red silk purse holding 20 gold crowns, and a note that smelled of flowers. I would have bought you an earring, Piglet, but I noticed your ear is not pierced. Have it done and buy yourself something nice. He nearly wept again. He gave women presents. The world was standing on its head. Piglet? Oh, Light. After a minute, he did take the mask. She owed him that much, for his coat alone. When he finally reached the small, shaded courtyard, where they had been meeting each morning beside a tiny round pool of lily pads and brightly spotted white fish, he found Elysian and Brigitte ready for the Festival of Birds, too. The Tyrant had contented himself with a plain green mask, but Brigitte's was a spray of yellow and red with a crest of plumes. Her golden hair hung loose, with feathers tied all down its length, and she wore a dress with a wide yellow belt, diaphanous beneath more red and yellow feathers. It did not reveal nearly as much as Rosella's, yet it seemed about to every time she moved. He had never thought of her wearing a dress like other women. Sometimes it's fun to be looked at, she said, poking him in the ribs when he commented. Her grin would have done for an Elysian, saying how much fun it was to pinch serving girls. There's a lot more to it than feather dancers wore, but not enough to slow me down. And anyway, I cannot see we'll have to move quickly on this side of the river. The dice rattled in his head. What kept you? She went on. You didn't make us wait so you could tickle a pretty girl, I hope. He hoped he was not blushing. He was not certain what excuse he would have made, but just then, half a dozen men wearing feathered coats strolled into the courtyard, all with those narrow swords on their hips, all but one wearing an elaborate mask with colorful crest and beak that represented no bird ever seen by human eyes. The exception was Beslin, twirling his mask by its ribbon. Oh, blood and bloody ashes, what's he doing here? Beslin? Nelisian folded his hands in the pommel of his sword and shook his head in disbelief. Why, burn my soul, he says he intends to spend the festival in your company. Some promise you two made, he says. I told him it would be deadly boring, but he wouldn't believe me. I cannot think it is ever boring around Matt, Tylen's son said. His bow took them all in, but his dark eyes especially lingered on Brigitte. I've never had so much fun as I did drinking with him in Lady Elaine's water on Swoban night. The truth, I remember little. He did not seem to recognize that water. Strangely, considering the taste she had shown in men, Besslin was fine-looking, maybe a little too fine, not at all her sort. Strangely, she smiled slightly and preened under his scrutiny. Right then, Matt did not care how out of character she behaved. Obviously, Besslin suspected nothing, or that sort of his likely would already be out, but the last thing under the light Matt wanted was a day in company with the man. It would be excruciating. He had some sense of decency, even if Besslin's mother did not. The only problem was Besslin, who took that bloody promise to attend all the festivals and feast days together very seriously. The more Matt agreed with Nelisian that the day they had planned would be dull beyond belief, the more determined Besslin grew. After a bit, his face began to darken, and Matt began to think that sword might be unsheathed yet. Well, a promise was a promise. When he and Nelisian and Brigitte left the palace, half a dozen feathered fools strutted along. Matt was sure it would not have happened had Brigitte been wearing her proper clothes. The whole lot of them kept eyeing her and smiling. What was all that twisting around while he was spilling his eyes all over you? He muttered as they crossed the Mulhara. He tugged the ribbon holding the eagle mask tighter. I did not twist, I moved. Her primness was so blatantly false, he would have laughed some other time. Slightly. Abruptly, her grin was back, and she lowered her voice for his ear alone. I told you, sometimes it's fun to be looked at. Just because they're all too pretty doesn't mean I cannot enjoy them looking. Oh, you'll want to look at her, she added, pointing to a slender woman who went running by in a blue owl mask and rather fewer feathers than Rosella had worn. That was one of the things about Brigitte. She would nudge him in the ribs and point out a pretty girl for his eyes readily as any man he had ever known, and expect him to point out in turn what she liked to see, which was generally the ugliest man in sight. Whether or not she chose to go half naked today, a quarter anyway, she was, well, a friend. A strange world it was turning out to be. One woman he was beginning to think of as a drinking companion, and another after him as intently as he had ever pursued any pretty woman. In those old memories or his own. More intently, he had never chased any woman who let him know she did not want to be chased. A very strange world. The sun stood little more than halfway to its peak, but already celebrants filled the streets and squares and bridges. Tumblers and jugglers and musicians with feathers sewn about their clothes performed at every street corner, the music often drowned in laughter and shouting. For the poorer folk, a few feathers laced into their hair sufficed, pigeon feathers gathered from the pavement for the street children dodging about and the beggars. But masks and costumes grew more elaborate as purses grew heavier. More elaborate and frequently more scandalous. Men and women alike were often decked in feathers that revealed more skin than Rosella or that woman back in the Mulhara. No commerce moved in the streets or canals today, though a number of shops seemed to be open, along with every tavern and inn, of course. But here and there a wagon made its way through the throng, or a barge was pulled along supporting a platform where young women and men posed in bright bird masks that covered their entire heads, with spreading crests sometimes rising a full pace, moving long, colorful wings in such a way that the rest of their costumes were exposed only in flashes, which was just as well, considering. According to Besslin, these settings, as they were called, were usually presented in guild halls and private palaces and houses. The entire festival normally took place indoors for the most part. It did not snow properly in Ebudar, even when the weather was as it should be. Besslin said he would like to see this snow one day. But apparently ordinary winter was cold enough to keep people from running around outdoors all but unclothed. With the heat, everything was spilling into the streets. Wait until night fell, Veslin said. Then Matt would really see something. As sunlight faded, so did inhibitions. Staring at a tall, slender woman gliding along through the crowd in mask and feathered cloak, and beyond that, 6 or 7 feathers, Matt wondered what inhibitions some of these folk had left to shed. He almost shouted at her to cover herself with that cloak. She was pretty, but out in the street? Before the light and everybody? Those wagons carrying the settings attracted followers, of course. Thick knots of men and women who shouted and laughed as they tossed coins, and sometimes folded notes onto the wagons and squeezed everyone else in the street aside. He became used to fleeing ahead until they could duck down a crossing street, or waiting until the setting went by to cross an intersection or bridge. While waiting, Brigitte and Nelician tossed coins to filthy urchins and dirtier beggars. Well, Nelician tossed. Brigitte concentrated on the children and pressed each coin into a grubby hand like a gift. In one of those waits, Veslin suddenly put a hand on Nelician's arm, raising his voice above the crowd and a cacophony of music coming from at least 6 different places. "Forgive me, Tyrene, but not him." A ragged man edged back into the throng, warily. Gaunt-cheeked and bony, he seemed to have lost whatever pitiful feathers he might have found for his hair. "Why not?" Nelician demanded. "No brass ring on his little finger," Veslin replied. "He's not in the guild." "Light," Matt said. "A man can't even beg in this city without belonging to a guild?" Maybe it was his tone. The beggar leaped for his throat, a knife appearing in his grimy fist. Without thinking, Matt grabbed the man's arm and spun, slinging him away into the crowd. Some people cursed at Matt, some at the sprawling beggar. Some tossed the fellow a coin. From the corner of his eye, Matt saw a second skinny man in rags try to push Brigitte out of the way to reach him with a long knife. It was a foolish mistake to underestimate the woman because of her costume. From somewhere among those feathers, she produced a knife and stabbed him beneath the arm. "Look out!" Matt shouted at her, but there was no time for warnings. Even as he shouted, he drew from his coat sleeve and threw sidearmed. The blade streaked past her face to sink into the throat of yet another beggar flaunting steel before it could plant it in her ribs. Suddenly, there were beggars everywhere with knives and clubs studded with spikes. Screams and shouts rose as people in masks and costumes scrambled to get out of the way. Nelician slashed a man in rags across the face, sending him reeling. Veslin ran another through the middle, while his costumed cronies fought still others. Matt had no time to see more. He found himself back to back with Brigitte and facing his own adversaries. He could feel her shifting against him, hear her mutter curses, but he was barely conscious of it. Brigitte could take care of herself, and watching the 2 men in front of him, he was not sure he could do the same. The hulking fellow with the toothless sneer had only one arm and a puckered socket where his left eye had been, but his fist held a club 2 feet long, encircled by iron bands that sprouted spikes like steel thorns. His rat-faced little companion still had both eyes and several teeth, and despite sunken cheeks and arms that seemed all bone and sinew, he moved like a snake, licking his lips and flicking a rusty dagger from hand to hand. Matt aimed the shorter knife in his own hand, first one, then the other. It was still long enough to reach a man's vitals, and they danced and shuffled, each waiting for the other to leap at him first. "Old Cully won't like this spar," the bigger man growled, and Ratface darted forward, rusty blade flashing from hand to hand. He did not count on the knife that suddenly appeared in Matt's left hand and sliced across his wrist. The dagger clattered to the paving stones, but the fellow flung himself at Matt anyway. As Matt's other blade stabbed into his chest, he squealed, eyes going wide, arms wrapping around Matt convulsively. The bald fellow's sneer widened, his club rising as he stepped in. The grin vanished as 2 beggars swarmed over him, snarling and stabbing. Staring incredulously, Matt shoved Ratface's corpse away. The street was clear for 50 paces except for combatants, and everywhere beggars rolled on the pavement, 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 stabbing at one, beating him with clubs or rocks. Veslin caught Matt's arm. There was blood on his face, but he was grinning. Let's get out of here and let the Fellowship of Alms finish its business. There's no honor in fighting beggars, and besides, the guild won't leave any of these interlopers alive. Follow me. Nelisian was scowling. Doubtless he saw no honor in fighting beggars either, and Beslin's friends, several with their costumes awry, and one with his mask off so another could dab at a cut across his forehead. The man with the cut was grinning too. Birgitta bore not a scratch that Matt could see, and her costume looked as neat as it had back in the palace. She made her knife disappear. There was no way she could hide a blade under those feathers, but she did. Matt made no protest at being drawn away, but he did growl, "Do beggars always go around attacking people in this city?" Beslin might not appreciate hearing it called a bloody city. The man laughed. "You are Taviran, Matt. There's always excitement around Taviran." Matt smiled back with gritted teeth. Bloody fool, bloody city, and bloody Taviran. Well, if a beggar slit his throat, he would not have to go back to the palace and let Tylan peel him like a ripe pear. Come to think of it, she had called him her little pear. Bloody everything! The street between the dyer's shop and the rows of the ale bar had its share of revelers, though not many scantily clad. Apparently you had to have coin to go near naked. Though the acrobats in front of the merchant's house on the corner came close, the men barefoot and bare-chested in tight, brightly colored breeches, the women in even tighter breeches and thin blouses. They all had a few feathers in their hair, as did the capering musicians playing in front of the small palace at the far corner. A woman with a flute, another blowing on a tall, twisted black tube covered with levers, and a fellow beating a timbre for all he was worth. The house they had come to watch looked shut up tight. The tea at the Rose was as bad as ever, which meant it was much better than the wine. Elysian stuck to the sour local ale. Birgitta said thanks without saying for what, and Matt shrugged it off silently. They grinned at each other and tapped cups. The sun rose, and Beslin sat balancing first one boot on the toe of the other, then the other way around. But his companions began growing restive, no matter how often he pointed out that Matt was Taviran. A scuffle with beggars was hardly proper excitement. The street was too narrow for any settings to pass. The women were not as pretty as elsewhere, and even looking at Birgitta seemed to pall once they realized that she did not intend to kiss even one of them. With protestations of regret that Beslin would not come, they hurried off to find somewhere more exhilarating. Elysian took a stroll down the alley beside the dyers, and Birgitta vanished into the Rose's murky interior to find, she said, whether there was anything at all fit to drink hidden in some forgotten corner. "I never expected to see a warder garb like that," Beslin said, changing his boots around. Matt blinked. The fellow had sharp eyes. She had not removed her mask once. Well, as long as he did not know about it. "I think you will be good for my mother, Matt." Choking, Matt sprayed tea into the passers-by. Several glared at him angrily, and one slender woman with a nice little bosom gave him a coy smile from beneath the blue mask he thought was meant to be a wren. She stamped a foot and stalked off when he did not smile back. Luckily, no one was angry enough to take it beyond glares, before they too went on their way. Or maybe unluckily. He would not have minded if 6 or 8 piled on him right then. "What do you mean?" he said hoarsely. Beslin's head whipped around in wide-eyed surprise. "Why, her choosing you for her pretty, of course. Why is your face so red? Are you angry? Why?" Suddenly he slapped his forehead and laughed. "You think I will be angry? Forgive me. I forget you're an outlander. Matt, she's my mother, not my wife. Father died 10 years ago, and she has always claimed to be too busy. I'm just glad she chose someone I like. Where are you going?" He did not realize he was on his feet until Beslin spoke. "I just need to clear my head." "But you're drinking tea, Matt." Dodging around a green sedan chair, he half saw the door of the house open, and a woman with a blue-feathered cloak over her dress slip out. Unthinkingly, his head was spinning too much to think clearly, he fell in behind her. Beslin knew. He approved. His own mother, and he... "Matt!" Elysian shouted behind him. "Where are you going?" "If I'm not back by tomorrow," Matt shouted back absently over his shoulder, "tell them they'll have to find it for themselves." He walked on after the woman in a daze, not hearing if Elysian or Beslin shouted again. The man knew. He remembered once thinking that Beslin and his mother were both mad. They were worse. All of Abu Dar was mad. He was hardly aware of the dice still spinning inside his skull.
From a window of the meeting room, Rihanna watched Solane disappear down the street toward the river. Some fellow in a bronze coat followed in her wake, but if he tried to impede her, he would find out soon enough that Solane had no time for men and no patience with them. Rihanna was not sure why the urge had grown so strong today. For days it had come on almost with the morning and faded with the sun, and for days she had fought. By the strict rules they did not quite dare call laws, that order was given at the half moon, still 6 nights off. But today, she had spoken the order before she thought, and been unable to make herself retract until the proper time. It would be well. No one had seen any sign of those 2 young fools calling themselves Elaine and Nynaeve anywhere in the city. Thank the light, there had been no need to take dangerous chances. Sighing, she turned to the others, who waited until she took her chair before seating themselves. It would be well, as it always had been. Secrets would be kept, as they always had been. But still, she had no touch of foretelling or anything of that sort, yet perhaps that overwhelming urge had been telling her something. 12 women watched her expectantly. "I think we should consider moving everyone who does not wear the belt to the farm for a little while." There was little discussion. They were the elders, but she was the eldest. In that, at least, there was no harm in behaving as Aes Sedai did. Chapter 30. The first...
All right, everyone. I'm going to call into this live for tonight. But I want to thank everyone for stopping by and everyone who keeps stopping by. I appreciate all y'all's support. Until next time, everyone, y'all have a good one and stay safe.